The bus left Lydia at a crossroads that didn't deserve the name. Two dirt roads met under a sun that had baked the earth into something closer to clay than soil, and the only shade for miles came from a listing fence post that looked ready to give up. She stood there with a canvas bag that held everything she owned and watched the Greyhound kick dust into the air as it rolled back toward civilization. No one got off with her. No one had spoken to her for the last 200 miles. That was fine. She'd learned to prefer it that way. The land stretched flat in three directions, broken only by the occasional scrub brush and the shimmer of heat that made the horizon look like water. To the west, though, there were structures, low buildings, a barn, fencing that suggested someone was still trying to make something work out here. That would be the Ridge Ranch, assuming the man on the phone hadn't lied. She started walking. Her boots were wrong for this. Too much heel, bought in a city where image mattered more than function, but they were what she had. The bag wasn't heavy, but the heat made every step feel twice as long. Sweat collected at her temples and ran down her back, soaking through the thin fabric of her shirt. She'd worn her hair down to hide the scar that ran from her right ear to her collarbone, a pale line that people tended to stare at when they noticed it. Out here, with no one watching, she pulled it back into a ponytail and let the air touch her neck. The ranch came into focus slowly. What had looked like order from a distance revealed itself as something closer to managed chaos. Fences needed mending. The barn's roof sagged on one side. Chickens wandered loose in a yard that should have been penned, and from somewhere beyond the main house came the bleating of goats that sounded distressed. A man emerged from the barn as she approached. Tall, lean, in the way that came from work rather than intention, with a face that sun and wind had carved into something hard. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there with his hands on his hips and watched her close the last 100 yards between them. "You Lydia Harrow?" His voice carried across the yard without him raising it. "Yes, sir." "You're late. Bus doesn't run on what you'd call a schedule." He looked her over, not in the way some men did, but like he was evaluating livestock. She'd seen that look before, usually right before someone decided she wasn't worth the trouble. "You know anything about ranching?" "No, sir." "Cooking?" "Enough." "Kids?" She hesitated. "Depends on the kids." That got something that might have been a smile, but it died before it reached his eyes. "Caleb Ridge. I own this place, or what's left of it." He gestured toward the house. "I've got 3 kids who need looking after. Meals, cleaning, making sure they don't kill each other or themselves. Ranch work if you're capable. Room and board plus 50 a week. You last a month. We'll talk about more." 50 a week was barely enough to keep her in bus tickets, but she'd worked for less. "What happened to the last person?" "Lasted 6 days." He turned back toward the barn. "Your room's the small one off the kitchen. Supper's at 6. Kids get home from school around 4. "Mr. Ridge." He stopped but didn't turn around. "Why'd you hire me?" "Over the phone, I mean. You didn't ask for references." Now he did turn, and his eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and unforgiving. "Because you were the only person who called, and because you sounded like you needed this bad enough to stick." He paused. "Was I wrong?" "No, sir." "Then get settled. You start tomorrow." The house was better inside than out, which wasn't saying much. Someone had cared about it once. There were curtains that matched, furniture that had been chosen with thought. But time and neglect had worn it down. Dust covered the surfaces. Dishes sat in the sink. The floor needed sweeping and probably scrubbing after that. The room he'd mentioned was barely big enough for the narrow bed and dresser it contained, but it had a window that looked out on the western fields and a door that locked from the inside. Lydia set her bag on the bed and sat down next to it. The mattress was thin, the springs audible, but she'd slept in worse places. She could hear voices from somewhere deeper in the house. Children's voices, rising and falling in an argument she couldn't quite make out. After a moment, footsteps approached and someone knocked on her door. "It's open." A girl appeared in the doorway, maybe 11 or 12, with her father's pale eyes and a skepticism that seemed too old for her face. "You're the new housekeeper." "That's right." "You won't last." The girl said it matter-of-factly, without malice. "Nobody does." "Why's that?" Because Dad's mean and the work's hard and we're too far from anywhere that matters. She crossed her arms. I'm Emma. That's Jesse yelling in the other room. He's 9. And that's Maddie crying. She's 6 and she cries about everything. Nice to meet you, Emma. You don't have to be polite. We're not. She looked Lydia up and down with the same evaluating expression her father had used. You running from something? The question was direct enough to catch her off guard. What makes you ask that? Because that's the only reason people come out here. Dad's running from what happened to Mom. You're probably running from something too. Your mom died? 3 years ago. Cancer. Emma said it flatly, like she'd learned to remove the emotion from the word. That's when everything got bad. That's when people started leaving. I'm sorry. I already said you don't have to be polite. Emma turned to go, then stopped. Supper's at 6. Don't be late. Dad hates that. The afternoon passed in a kind of suspended quiet. Lydia unpacked her bag. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, undergarments, a jacket, a toiletry kit, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a t-shirt, a small revolver she'd bought in Amarillo and never fired. She put it in the dresser drawer under her clothes and tried not to think about why she'd kept it. At 4, she heard the school bus. Doors slammed. Voices rose, and the house suddenly felt occupied in a way it hadn't before. She stayed in her room, listening to the rhythm of the place, learning its sounds. At 5:30, she went to the kitchen. It was worse than she'd expected. The sink was full, the stove was crusted with old food, and the refrigerator held mostly beer and condiments. She found eggs, cheese, bread that was only slightly stale, and some potatoes that hadn't sprouted yet. Not much, but enough. She was at the stove when Caleb came in from the barn. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his face before he controlled it. Didn't ask you to start today. You said supper's at 6. She flipped the eggs. I figured that included today. He washed his hands at the sink, moving the dishes aside without comment. Kids eat anything? Don't know yet. This is what you had. Fair enough. He called them in, Emma first, then Jesse, who was shorter and rounder than his sister, built like he'd grow into something solid, and finally Maddie, who had her father's height and her sister's wariness. They sat at the table without speaking, watching Lydia like she might disappear if they looked away. She put the food out, scrambled eggs with cheese, fried potatoes, toast, and sat down at the remaining chair. Nobody moved. Something wrong? She asked. We say grace first, Emma said. Usually. Lydia looked at Caleb. He was looking at his plate. Not anymore, he said quietly. Eat. The meal passed mostly in silence. Jesse ate quickly, mechanically, like he was fueling more than enjoying. Emma picked at her food, watching Lydia between bites. Maddie ate slowly, carefully, cutting her eggs into precise, small pieces. This is good, Jesse said finally, surprising everyone. Better than Dad's cooking. That's not hard, Emma muttered. You got something to say. Say it straight, Caleb told her. Emma set her fork down. I'm just saying maybe if we had decent food more often, Maddie wouldn't be so skinny. Maddie's fine. She's not fine. Nothing's fine. We're falling apart out here, and you know it. The air in the room changed, tension pulling tight like wire. Lydia saw Caleb's jaw work, saw his hands grip the edge of the table. That's enough. It's not enough. It's never enough with you. Mom would. I said that's enough. His voice didn't rise, but something in it made Emma go quiet. You're excused. Emma stood up fast enough to make her chair scrape. She left without clearing her plate, and a moment later a door slammed somewhere in the house. Jesse looked at his father. Can I go? Go. He left too, slower, taking his plate to the sink first. Maddie stayed, pushing her eggs around, her eyes red but tearless. You too, Maddie girl, Caleb said, softer now. Go on. She slipped away like smoke, leaving Lydia alone with Caleb and the wreckage of the meal. Sorry about that, he said finally. Don't be. She's not wrong, is she? His eyes came up sharp. About what? Things falling apart. He stood up, collecting plates with more force than necessary. That's not your concern. You're here to keep the house and watch the kids. That's all. All right. But it wasn't all right, and they both knew it. Lydia started clearing the table, and they worked in silence, her washing, him drying, until this kitchen was clean enough to pass inspection. When they were done, he hung the towel on its hook and stood there, looking out the window at the darkening land. Emma's mother used to handle all this, he said quietly. The house, the kids, the balance of things. I managed the ranch. That was the arrangement. When she got sick, I tried to learn, but he shook his head. Some things you can't learn fast enough. You hired help. 5 housekeepers in 3 years. None of them stayed. Some couldn't handle the isolation. Some couldn't handle the kids. One stole from me and left in the middle of the night. He turned to face her. You seem different. Harder, maybe. That's not a criticism. I've had to be. Because of what you're running from? So Emma had told him, or he'd guessed it himself. Something like that. Long as it doesn't follow you here, I don't care what it is. But if it does... He left the sentence unfinished. We clear? Yes, sir. He nodded and headed for the door, then stopped. The kids will test you. They're testing everyone now, seeing what breaks. Don't let them see you break. I won't. After he left, Lydia finished cleaning, really cleaning, the kind that got into corners and under things. She worked until her back ached and her hands were raw, and when she finally went to her room, it was after midnight. She locked the door, pulled the curtains, and sat on the edge of the bed with the revolver in her lap. 3 years of running, 3 years of new names and new towns and looking over her shoulder. 3 years since Marcus had found her in that apartment in Tulsa, and she'd done what she had to do to get away. The scar on her neck was his parting gift, delivered with a broken bottle while she fought for the door. She'd thought she'd covered her tracks, changed her name legally, paid cash for everything, stayed off social media, avoided cameras. But Marcus wasn't the type to give up, and he had friends who knew how to find people who didn't want to be found. If he found her here, it wouldn't just be her problem. It would be Caleb's problem, the kids' problem, everyone she came into contact with. She should leave, get back on that bus tomorrow and keep moving. But she was so tired of moving. The next morning came early. Lydia woke to the sound of roosters, actual roosters, which she'd never heard outside of movies, and sunlight already heating her small room. She dressed quickly and found the kitchen empty, coffee made, but no sign of Caleb or the kids. She made breakfast anyway, oatmeal with cinnamon, toast, the last of the eggs. By the time she heard footsteps, everything was ready. Jesse appeared first, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You're still here. Disappointed? No. He sat down at the table, eyeing the oatmeal suspiciously. What is it? Oatmeal. We don't have oatmeal. You do now. I found it in the back of the pantry. Emma came in next, already dressed and ready for school. She served herself without comment and ate standing up by the counter, scrolling through her phone. No phones at breakfast, Lydia said. Emma looked up, surprised. Dad lets us. I don't. You're not our mom. The words hung there, sharp and intentional. Lydia met Emma's eyes and didn't look away. No, I'm not. But I'm the one making breakfast, so my rules. Phone goes away, or you eat somewhere else. For a long moment, Emma just stared at her. Then slowly, she put the phone in her pocket and sat down at the table. Maddie drifted in last, quiet as always. She took the smallest serving of everything and ate in careful, deliberate bites. Caleb came in as they were finishing, dirt already on his boots. School bus comes at 7:15. Make sure they're ready. They will be. He poured himself coffee, drank it standing up, and left again without breakfast. Through the window, Lydia watched him head toward the barn, his shoulders tight with whatever weight he carried. He doesn't eat much, Jesse said, following her gaze. Not since Mom. He needs to. Good luck with that, Emma said. We've tried. The school bus was a yellow beacon in all that brown land. Lydia walked the kids out to the road and waited with them, which surprised Emma enough to comment on it. You don't have to stand here. I know. The bus arrived, and the driver, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and too much jewelry, gave Lydia a long look. You the new help? Yes, ma'am. Lord help you, honey. This place eats people alive. The kids climbed on and the bus pulled away, leaving Lydia alone at the crossroads. She stood there for a moment, looking back at the ranch. From here, she could see how much work needed doing. The fence along the road was down in 3 places. The barn roof needed patching before the next rain. The whole property had the air of something slowly surrendering to entropy. She went back to the house and started making a list. By noon, she'd cleaned the kitchen properly, scrubbed the bathroom, started laundry that probably hadn't been done in weeks, and made inventory of what supplies they had versus what they needed. The pantry was a disaster. Half-empty bags of flour, expired cans, things shoved in and forgotten. She pulled everything out, threw away what was bad, and reorganized what was left. She was knee-deep in this when she heard a vehicle approach. Through the kitchen window, she watched a truck pull up, newer than Caleb's, cleaner, with a logo on the door she couldn't quite make out. A man got out, mid-40s, well-dressed for ranch country, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He headed for the barn, and a few minutes later she heard voices, his smooth and reasonable, Caleb's rough with barely controlled anger. Lydia wiped her hands and went to the window. They were standing in the barn doorway, the stranger gesturing expansively while Caleb stood with his arms crossed. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't friendly. After 5 minutes, the stranger got back in his truck. Before he left, he looked toward the house, looked right at the window where Lydia stood, and smiled. Not friendly, not welcoming, just aware. She stepped back from the window as the truck pulled away. Caleb came in 20 minutes later, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. He went straight for the cabinet where he kept the whiskey and poured 2 fingers into a glass. "Who was that?" Lydia asked. "Nobody." "Didn't look like nobody." He drank the whiskey in one go. "Man named Warren Kellerman. Owns half the county, wants to own the other half. Been after my land for 2 years. You selling?" "No." He poured another glass. "But he doesn't take no for an answer." "What's he offering?" Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. "Why do you care?" "Because I'm living here. Because those kids are living here. Because if something's coming, I'd rather know about it than be surprised." He set the glass down without drinking. "He's offering enough to clear my debts and leave me with something to start over somewhere else. Somewhere easier. Sounds reasonable. It would be if I believed for 1 second that he'd let me walk away clean. Men like Warren don't get where they are by playing fair." He moved to the window, looking out at his land. "This place has been in my family for 4 generations. My father died working this ground. My wife loved every acre of it. I'm not handing it over to some corporate rancher who's going to tear out the fences and run it like a factory. Even if you can't hold on to it," his shoulders went rigid, "I'll hold on to it." "How?" "I've seen the books. They were on the desk in the office. You're 3 months behind on the feed bill. The bank's been calling, and that fence out front isn't going to fix itself." He turned on her fast. "You've been here 1 day. 1 day. And you think you know I know what struggling looks like," she cut him off. "I know what it looks like when someone's drowning and won't ask for help. And I know what it looks like when someone's about to lose everything because they're too proud or too stubborn to admit they can't do it alone." The silence stretched between them, dangerous and taut. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice low. "What would you know about any of that?" "More than you'd think." He studied her face, and she let him, didn't hide the scar or the hardness or any of it. After a long moment, something shifted in his expression. "The kids will be home soon. You should get their snacks ready." It was a dismissal, but a gentler one. Lydia nodded and went back to the kitchen, and Caleb stayed at the window, staring out at land he was trying desperately not to lose. The afternoon settled into routine. Kids came home. Homework happened at the kitchen table while Lydia started dinner. Actual dinner this time, with chicken she'd found in the freezer and vegetables she'd bought on credit at the small store 5 miles down the road. The store owner had looked at her suspiciously until she mentioned the Ridge Ranch, and then his expression had shifted to something like pity. "You working for Caleb?" "Yes, sir." "Good luck with that. He's got more pride than sense, that one. Won't accept help even when he needs it." The man had bagged her groceries slowly. "You seem like a decent woman. Don't let that place drag you down with it." Now, cooking in the kitchen while the kids argued about math homework, Lydia thought about those words. About the bus driver's warning. About Emma's certainty that she wouldn't last. Everyone seemed convinced this place was cursed. that Caleb was too broken to save, that the land was lost. But Lydia had learned something in 3 years of running. The only things that were truly lost were the ones you stopped fighting for. Dinner was better than breakfast. The kids actually talked. Jessie about school, Emma about a friend who was moving away, even Maddie about a drawing she'd made. Caleb was quiet, but he ate, and that felt like a small victory. After dinner, Lydia was washing dishes when Emma appeared at her elbow. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Where'd you come from? Before here?" Lydia kept washing. "Lots of places." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Emma picked up a towel and started drying. "Everyone says you're running from something. I told them you probably were." Everyone being who? The kids at school, the bus driver, Mrs. Chen at the store. Emma set a plate in the rack. "Small town. People talk." "Let them talk." "Doesn't it bother you?" "Not particularly." Lydia rinsed a pot. "People are going to think what they want regardless of what you tell them. Might as well let them make up their own stories." Emma considered this. "You're weird." "I've been called worse." That got a smile, small but real. "You're also the first person who stood up to me. Everyone else either tries to be my friend or just gives up. I'm not trying to be your friend. I know. That's why I don't completely hate you yet." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and when Emma went to do her homework, Lydia felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not quite belonging, but maybe the possibility of it. That night, after the kids were in bed and Caleb had retreated to his office, Lydia sat on the porch and watched the stars. The sky out here was different than in the cities. Bigger, fuller, like someone had thrown diamonds across black velvet. No light pollution to drown them out. No noise to distract from the sound of wind moving through dry grass. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. She heard the screen door and knew without looking that it was Caleb. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Haven't been good at sleeping for a while." He sat down on the porch step. Not close, but not far either. "What happened to you? Before here?" "Nothing worth talking about. Try me." Lydia looked at him, at the way the moonlight caught the lines around his eyes and the gray threading through his dark hair. He looked exhausted, worn down, but there was something solid about him still, like bedrock under erosion. "I was with someone," she said finally. "Someone who didn't like it when I tried to leave. So I left anyway, and he made it his mission to find me. I've been moving ever since." "He find you?" "Not yet. But you think he will?" It wasn't a question. Lydia nodded. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "If he shows up here, you tell me, immediately. It's not your problem. You're on my land, taking care of my kids. That makes it my problem." He stood up, brushing dust from his jeans. "I mean it, Lydia. You don't face that alone. Not here." Before she could respond, he went inside, leaving her with the stars and the wind and the unfamiliar feeling of someone having her back. The first week passed in a blur of work. Lydia fell into the rhythm of the place. Up before dawn, breakfast ready before the kids woke, keeping them fed and housed and mostly civil to each other. Between those duties, she started tackling the ranch work Caleb couldn't keep up with alone. She mended fences, fed chickens, learned which goats were mean and which were just loud. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders ached from work they weren't used to. But she kept going because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant fear. Caleb watched her with something like suspicion at first, waiting for her to quit or complain. When she did neither, the suspicion shifted to grudging respect. "You don't have to do all this, he said one afternoon, finding her replacing boards in the barn wall. "I know." "Then why are you?" She hammered in a nail before answering. "Because it needs doing, and because I'm here." That seemed to satisfy him. He handed her more nails and worked alongside her until the section was done. The second week brought the first real test. Lydia was in town, such as it was, more of a wide spot in the road with a store, a post office, and a diner. Getting supplies when she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. That woman staying at the Ridge place. "I heard she's running from the law." "I heard it was an ex-husband, violent type." "Well, either way, she won't last. Nobody does out there. That family's cursed." Lydia came around the corner with her basket. Both women stopped talking, their faces going carefully neutral. "Morning," Lydia said pleasantly. "Morning," one of them managed. She paid for her supplies and left, but the words stuck with her. Cursed. That family's cursed. Maybe they were. Maybe she'd hitched her wagon to something doomed, but doomed was better than running. The third week, Warren Kellerman came back. This time he brought papers, an offer, official and legal, with numbers that made even Lydia's eyes widen. Caleb tore it in half without reading past the first page. "I'm not selling." "Caleb, be reasonable." I said no. Caleb's voice was flat, final. "You need to leave." Warren's smile didn't waver. "You can't hold on forever. The bank's already circling. One bad season and you're done. Why go down with the ship when you could walk away with enough to start fresh?" "Because it's my ship." Warren turned to go, then noticed Lydia standing in the kitchen doorway. His smile widened. "And who's this? Another temporary fix to a permanent problem?" "That's none of your concern," Caleb said. "Everything in this county's my concern." Warren tipped his hat to Lydia. "Ma'am, whatever he's paying you, I'd be happy to double it if you'd come work for me." "I'm good where I am. For now." He got in his truck, but before he drove away, he leaned out the window. "Offers on the table for another 30 days, Caleb. After that, I start looking at other options." The truck disappeared down the road, leaving dust and tension in its wake. "Other options?" Lydia asked. "Nothing good." Caleb went to the office and shut the door. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She got up around 2 in the morning and found Caleb already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with financial records spread in front of him. "Can't make the numbers work?" she asked quietly. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Not without a miracle." She sat down across from him. "What if you had help? Real help, not just me keeping the house." "Like what?" "Like selling some of the land. Not to Warren, to someone local. Someone who'd work with you instead of against you." "There is no one local with that kind of money. Warren's bought everyone out or driven them under." He rubbed his eyes. "I'm the last holdout. That's why he wants this place so bad. It's the missing piece. Then we find a different way." "There is no different way, Lydia." He looked at her with exhausted honesty. "I'm barely keeping the lights on. The feed bill's due next week, and I don't have it. The bank wants their payment, or they start foreclosure. And meanwhile, I've got 3 kids who need clothes and food, and a future that's better than watching their father lose everything their mother loved." Lydia reached across the table and took the papers from him. She spent an hour going through them, making notes, doing math in the margins. "You're $2,000 short on the feed bill," she said finally. "I know. And $5,000 behind on the mortgage. I know that too. But you've got assets, equipment, livestock. The goats alone are worth something if you sell them right." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'm not selling the goats. Even to save the ranch? Those goats were my wife's project. She started that herd from nothing, built it into something valuable. I'm not liquidating her memory to buy myself another month." Lydia understood that kind of stubbornness. She'd held on to things she should have let go of too, just because letting go felt like admitting defeat. "All right, she said. No goats. What else?" They worked until dawn, finding small savings here and there, but nothing that added up to enough. When the sun started lightening the sky, Caleb pushed back from the table. "Get some sleep. Kids will be up soon." "So will you." "I'm used to it." But as he stood, she saw him waver, just slightly, just enough to show how exhausted he really was. Without thinking, she stood and steadied him, her hand on his arm. "You can't keep this up," she said quietly. "Don't have a choice. Everyone has choices." He looked down at where her hand rested on his arm, then up at her face. For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, of 2 people who understood what it meant to keep fighting when fighting seemed pointless. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact. "Thank you for trying." He left, and Lydia stood alone in the kitchen as the sun came up over land that was slowly, inexorably slipping away. The 4th week brought the town's judgment into sharper focus. At the diner, the waitress served her slowly, begrudgingly. At the store, the owner watched her like she might steal something. And when she picked up the kids from school, the other parents stared openly, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. Emma noticed. They're talking about you. Let them talk. Doesn't it make you mad? Being mad doesn't change anything. But it did make her watchful. Small towns had long memories and sharp eyes. And if Marcus came looking, these people would remember the stranger who'd been asking questions. She started varying her routes, started checking the mirrors more often, started sleeping with the revolver within reach. On day 28, everything changed. Lydia was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud on the road. Not unusual, the feed truck was due, but something about it made her stop, made her shield her eyes and really look. The truck that pulled up wasn't the feed delivery. It was a black sedan, too clean for the country, with rental plates. A man got out. Lydia's heart stopped. Not Marcus. Relief flooded through her so fast it made her dizzy, but not relief for long because the man who approached was familiar in a different way. Danny Reeves, Marcus's cousin, his fixer, the man who found people who didn't want to be found. He smiled when he saw her. Lydia, been a long time. She dropped the laundry basket and ran for the house, made it to the porch before he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. I'm not here to cause trouble, just want to talk. Lydia stopped, her hand on the door. Inside she could hear the kids. Home early, probably teacher in service day. If she went in, she led him to them. She turned around slowly. How'd you find me? You know how. He walked closer, hands visible, non-threatening. You got sloppy. Used your real name on a credit application. The store owner ran it through the system, and the system pinged us. What do you want? Marcus wants to talk, that's all. Just talk. He tried to kill me. That's not how he remembers it. Danny stopped at the base of the porch steps. Look, I don't care about your history. I'm just delivering a message. He knows where you are now. He knows you're working for some rancher with money problems. He knows you've got nowhere left to run. Danny pulled out a card and set it on the porch railing. Call him. Work it out. Or don't. And he shows up himself. Your choice. He got back in the sedan and drove away, leaving the card and the threat and Lydia standing there with her world tilting sideways. She grabbed the card and went inside. The kids were in the living room arguing about the TV. They barely looked up when she passed. In her room, door locked, Lydia stared at the card. A phone number, nothing else. She could throw it away, could pretend Danny had never come. But he had come. And Marcus knew where she was, which meant running again. New town, new name, new everything, which meant leaving these kids, this ranch, this strange half-life she'd started building. She looked out the window at the land, harsh and beautiful and struggling, like her, like all of them. For 3 years she'd run. 3 years of looking over her shoulder and sleeping light and never putting down roots because roots could trap you. But maybe she was tired of running. Maybe for the first time she had something worth standing still for. Lydia pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long time. Then she made a call, not to the number on the card, but to a different number, one she'd hoped she'd never have to use. The man who answered sounded surprised to hear from her. Lydia? I need help, she said quietly, and I need it fast. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the Ridge Ranch, painting the struggling land in shades of amber and gold. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Lydia Harrow stopped running long enough to plant her feet and prepare to fight. The man on the other end of the line was named Ray Hutchins, and Lydia had met him in a women's shelter in Oklahoma City 2 years ago. He'd been there dropping off supplies, ex-military turned social worker, the kind of person who'd seen enough darkness to recognize it in others. They'd talked exactly once, but he'd given her his number and told her to call if she ever needed the kind of help that didn't come with questions. She'd never called. Until now. Talk to me, Ray said, his voice steady even at 11 o'clock at night. Lydia told him everything in quick, efficient sentences. Marcus. The 3 years running, Danny showing up. The card with the number. Ray listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You still have the gun I told you to buy? Yes. Good. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to, but keep it close. She heard him moving, the sound of keys jingling. I can be there in 8 hours. Maybe 7 if I push it. In the meantime, you stay visible. Don't hide, don't act scared. Men like Marcus feed on fear. I can't just sit here and wait for him to show up. You're not going to. You're going to do exactly what you've been doing. Take care of those kids, work that ranch, act like nothing's changed. Because the minute you run, he wins. The minute you show fear, he knows he's got you. Ray paused. You trust this rancher you're working for? I don't know, maybe. Then tell him, tonight, before this gets worse. Lydia hung up and sat on the edge of her bed, holding the phone like it might offer answers. Outside her door, she could hear the house settling into evening, Emma's music playing too loud, Jesse's video game sounds, Maddie's soft footsteps in the hallway. Normal sounds, safe sounds. She had to keep them that way. She found Caleb in the barn working on the tractor engine by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that only spread it around. Something wrong? We need to talk. He must have heard something in her voice because he set down his tools immediately and gave her his full attention. All right. Lydia told him about Danny, about Marcus, about the 3 years and the scar, and why she'd really come to this remote ranch in the middle of nowhere. She told it straight, without embellishment or excuses, and when she finished, Caleb's face had gone hard. He threatened you, on my property. He said he just wanted to talk. And you believe that? No. Caleb grabbed the shotgun that hung on the barn wall and checked it was loaded. If he comes back, he won't come back, not Danny. He delivered the message, but Marcus might come himself, or he might send someone worse. Lydia wrapped her arms around herself. I should leave, before this becomes your problem. It's already my problem. You're here. The kids know you. Emma actually likes you, which is saying something. He set the shotgun down but kept it within reach. Besides, I'm not in the habit of turning people out because things get difficult. This isn't difficult. This is dangerous. So is staying here and watching this place fall apart. So is letting Warren Kellerman steal 4 generations of family land. So is raising 3 kids alone when you don't have the first idea what you're doing. He looked at her directly. I've got enough problems that one more doesn't much matter. And at least this one I can shoot at if it comes to it. Despite everything, Lydia almost smiled. You're insane. That's been said. He picked up his tools again. You got a plan? Someone's coming to help. He'll be here by morning. Someone reliable? I think so. I hope so. Good enough. Caleb went back to the tractor, but his movements were tenser now, more aware. Get some sleep. And Lydia, lock your door tonight. She did lock her door, and she slept with the revolver under her pillow, but sleep was fractured and full of dreams where she was running and the ground kept shifting under her feet. She woke every hour, listening for sounds that didn't belong, and by the time the sun came up, she felt more exhausted than if she hadn't slept at all. Ray Hutchins arrived at 6:30 in the morning, driving a beat-up Ford truck that looked like it had seen every back road in Texas. He was exactly as Lydia remembered, mid-50s, built like someone who still did the work even though he didn't have to, with kind eyes that had seen too much. He shook Caleb's hand on the porch and declined the offer of coffee. I'd rather take a look around first, get a sense of the sight lines and access points. Caleb took him on a walk of the property while Lydia got breakfast ready for the kids. She was cracking eggs when Emma came into the kitchen, already dressed for school. Who's that guy with Dad? A friend of mine. He's going to help with some security concerns. Emma's eyes sharpened. What kind of security concerns? The kind you don't need to worry about. That's a non-answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Lydia plated the eggs. Eat. Bus comes in 40 minutes. Jesse and Maddie joined them, and breakfast proceeded with the usual chaos of backpacks and missing homework, and arguments over who got the last of the orange juice. Lydia kept half her attention on the window, watching Ray and Caleb move around the perimeter of the property. They were deep in conversation, Ray pointing things out, Caleb nodding. After the kids left for school, the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table and Ray laid out his assessment. You've got good visibility on 3 sides, but the east fence line is compromised. Too many blind spots, too much cover. If someone wanted to get close without being seen, that's where they'd come in. He pulled out a hand-drawn map of the property. You need motion sensors here, here, and here. Nothing fancy, just enough to give you warning. And you need to establish a protocol. If something trips the sensors, what do? Call the sheriff, Caleb said. Sheriff's 20 minutes away on a good day. By the time he gets here, whatever's happening is already done. Ray tapped the map. You need a safe room, somewhere the kids can go if things go bad, somewhere lockable with a phone. The pantry off the kitchen, Lydia said. It's got a heavy door and no windows. We could reinforce it. Show me. They spent the next hour turning the pantry into something approximating a safe room. Ray installed a deadbolt on the inside, moved supplies to make space, and set up a prepaid cell phone on the shelf with emergency numbers taped to the wall. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Now the hard part, Ray said, looking at Caleb. You need to train your kids what to do if someone shows up who isn't supposed to be here. They're going to ask questions. Let them ask. Better they're scared and prepared than ignorant and vulnerable. That afternoon, after school, Caleb gathered all 3 kids in the living room. Lydia stood in the doorway, watching Emma's face cycle through confusion and then worry as Caleb explained in careful, measured terms that there might be someone looking for Lydia, and if any strangers showed up asking questions, they were to come inside immediately and lock the doors. What kind of someone? Emma asked. The bad kind, Caleb said simply, and I need you all to take this seriously. That means no wandering off alone. That means staying where we can see you. That means if I or Lydia tell you to go to the pantry, you go. No arguments, no delays. Understand? Jessie looked scared. Maddie's eyes were huge. Emma just looked angry. This is because of her, isn't it? Emma pointed at Lydia. She brought this here. Emma, Caleb started, but Lydia stepped forward. Yes, she said flatly. It's because of me. I'm sorry. If I'd known, I wouldn't have come. But you did come, and now we're all in danger because of your problems. Emma, that's enough, Caleb said, his voice hard. No, it's not enough. We finally get someone who can actually cook and clean and doesn't quit after 3 days, and now she's going to get us killed. Nobody's getting killed, Ray said from the kitchen doorway. All the kids jumped. They hadn't noticed him there. He walked in slowly, non-threatening. I'm Ray. I do security consulting, and I'm going to make sure you're all safe while we sort this out. Who are you to her? Emma asked suspiciously. A friend. Someone who helps people when they're in tight spots. He sat down on the coffee table, putting himself at eye level with the kids. Here's what's going to happen. For the next few days, maybe a week, I'm going to be around. You'll see me doing weird things like checking fences and installing cameras. You might hear me walking around at night. That's all normal. What's not normal is if you see someone you don't recognize hanging around the property. If that happens, you tell an adult immediately. Can you do that? Jessie nodded. Maddie nodded. Emma crossed her arms but eventually nodded too. Good. Now your dad said something about cookies in the pantry. I haven't had a good cookie in about 6 months. Think you could show me where they are? It was a transparent attempt to diffuse the tension, but it worked. The kids scattered, and Caleb let out a long breath. Thank you, he told Ray. Don't thank me yet. We've still got to get through this. Ray looked at Lydia. You need to call that number, the one on the card. What? Call Marcus. Tell him you want to meet. Public place, your choice of location. We need to know what his actual endgame is here. Are you insane? I'm not meeting with him. You are. Because it's the only way to control the situation. Right now he's got all the power. He knows where you are. You don't know when he's coming. You flip that. You call him. You set the terms. You take back control. Lydia's hands were shaking. And then what? He kills me in a diner parking lot? He won't kill you in public. Men like Marcus need privacy for that. He'll want to talk, to threaten, to remind you that he owns you. You let him think he's won, and then you walk away, and will be there the whole time, making sure he doesn't follow. Caleb was shaking his head. This is a terrible idea. You got a better one? Silence. Ray pulled out the card that Lydia had shown him earlier. Make the call, today, before he decides to make the first move. Lydia took the card with fingers that didn't feel like her own. The number seemed to pulse on the paper, malevolent and waiting. She'd spent 3 years avoiding this moment, 3 years running from the sound of his voice. But Ray was right. Running had only delayed things. It hadn't solved them. She dialed before she could talk herself out of it. Marcus answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call." His voice hit her like a physical blow, smooth and cultured and utterly cold. She'd forgotten how he could sound so reasonable while planning something terrible. "I got your message." "Good. Saves me the trouble of coming to you." Papers rustled on his end. "Although I have to say, Lydia, you picked a real nowhere to hide in. I'm almost impressed." "What do you want, Marcus?" "What I've always wanted, for you to come home and stop this foolishness. That's not going to happen." "No?" His voice sharpened. "You stole from me. You embarrassed me. You made me look weak in front of people whose respect I need. And you think you can just disappear into Texas and that's the end of it?" "I didn't steal anything. I left. That's not the same thing." "You were mine, Lydia. Mine. You don't get to just leave." There it was. The possessiveness that had started soft and loving and slowly strangled everything good between them. She'd been his project, his trophy, his thing to control. And when she'd tried to become her own person, he'd turned vicious. "I'm not yours. I never was." "We'll see about that." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something almost gentle. "I'm willing to be reasonable. You come back, we talk this out like adults, and I'll consider forgiving what you did." "I don't want your forgiveness." "Then what do you want?" "For you to leave me alone." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You know I can't do that. You know what it would mean if I did. Every other person who's crossed me would think they could get away with it too. I can't have that. So this is about your reputation. This is about respect, about consequences." His voice went hard again. "You're going to meet me, Lydia, tomorrow, 1 o'clock. There's a diner about 40 miles from that ranch you're hiding on, Rosie's off Highway 77. You're going to sit down with me, and we're going to have a conversation about your future. And if I don't come, then I come to you, and I meet that rancher you're working for, and those kids, and we have our conversation there instead." The threat was clear and cold. "Your choice." The line went dead. Lydia stood there with the phone pressed to her ear until Ray gently took it from her hand. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "He wants to meet tomorrow, 1 o'clock, Rosie's Diner on Highway 77. "Perfect," Ray said. "That gives us time to prepare." "Prepare for what?" "He's going to kill me." "He's not going to kill you. He's going to try to scare you into compliance. It's what men like him do." Ray guided her to a chair. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to meet him like he wants. You're going to sit across from him and let him talk. You're going to wear a wire so we have everything on record. And Caleb and I are going to be in that diner, close enough to intervene if things go wrong." Caleb stepped forward. "I'm going?" "You're the local. You belong in a diner better than I do. We go together, sit at the counter, eat pie, look like regulars. Meanwhile, Lydia has her conversation, and if Marcus so much as twitches wrong, we're there." "This is insane," Lydia said. "All of it. I should just leave. Get on a bus tonight and disappear again." "You've been disappearing for 3 years," Ray said quietly. "How's that working out for you?" The words landed like stones. Lydia looked up at him, then at Caleb, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "If I do this and it goes wrong, I don't want those kids anywhere near here. I don't want them caught in the middle." "They won't be," Caleb said. "I'll have my sister take them for the day. Tell them it's a special treat, a trip to the city. They'll be 50 miles away before any of this happens." "And if he brings people? If it's not just him?" "Then we adapt," Ray said. "But my guess is he'll come alone. Men like Marcus want the satisfaction of breaking you personally. They don't delegate that." The rest of the day passed in preparation. Ray walked Lydia through what to say and what not to say, how to keep Marcus talking without incriminating herself. He showed her the wire, a tiny microphone that clipped to her bra strap, barely visible even if someone was looking for it. He made her practice staying calm, keeping her breathing steady, maintaining eye contact even when she wanted to run. Caleb watched all of this from the doorway, his expression growing darker by the hour. That evening, after the kids were in bed, he found Lydia on the porch again. She'd taken to spending her nights out here, watching the stars and trying to convince herself that this place could be safe. "You don't have to do this," he said without preamble. Yes, I do. Ray's good, but he's not infallible. Things could go wrong. I know. Caleb sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Emma asked me earlier why you're worth protecting. She wanted to know why I'm risking us getting involved in your mess. Lydia's throat tightened. What did you tell her? I told her that sometimes people need help, and if you have the ability to help and you don't, then you're part of the problem. He was quiet for a moment. But the truth is, I don't know why I'm doing this. You've been here a month. I barely know you. By all logic, I should tell you to handle your own problems and stay out of mine. So why don't you? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. Because you're the first person in 3 years who hasn't treated this place like it's already dead. You're the first person who's looked at me and my kids like we're worth the effort. And because... He stopped, shook his head, because I'm tired of watching everything fall apart and doing nothing about it. Lydia didn't know what to say to that, so she just sat there beside him, listening to the night sounds and trying to memorize this moment, this strange, fragile peace before everything went to hell. The next morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Caleb's sister arrived at 8 to pick up the kids, a cheerful woman named Beth who asked no questions and loaded 3 confused children into her minivan with promises of shopping and movies. Emma looked back at the house as they drove away, her face tight with worry. Ray ran through the plan one more time while Lydia got dressed. Casual clothes, nothing memorable. Hair down to hide the wire. No jewelry, no perfume, nothing that might stick in someone's memory later. You sit where you can see the door in, Ray said. You order coffee and something small to eat. You wait. When he comes in, you don't stand up. You don't greet him. You just nod. Let him come to you. And if he tries to make me leave with him? You say no, firmly, clearly, loudly enough that other people hear. You don't leave that diner with him under any circumstances. Understand? Lydia nodded, her stomach churning. The drive to Rosie's took 40 minutes. Ray drove, Caleb rode shotgun, and Lydia sat in the back trying to remember how to breathe normally. The landscape rolled past, endless brown interrupted by the occasional cluster of buildings that called itself a town. She'd driven roads like this for 3 years, always moving, never stopping long enough to leave an impression. Now she was driving toward the thing she'd been running from. Rosie's Diner sat at a crossroads just off Highway 77, a low building with a gravel parking lot and a neon sign that buzzed even in daylight. A dozen cars sat outside, which was good, enough witnesses to keep things civil, not so many that she'd get lost in the crowd. Ray parked at the far end of the lot. You go in first, get settled. We'll come in 5 minutes after you. Lydia's hand was on the door handle when Caleb turned around in his seat. If you want to run, now's the time. I won't judge you for it. She met his eyes. I'm done running. All right then, we've got your back. The diner was exactly what she'd expected. Worn linoleum, cracked vinyl booths, a long counter with stools that spun. Country music played from a radio behind the counter, and the smell of coffee and grease hung in the air. She chose a booth near the window with a clear view of the door and slid in facing the entrance. A waitress appeared almost immediately, older, tired, with the kind of face that had seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. Coffee? Please. And a piece of pie. Whatever you recommend. Peaches fresh, came in this morning. That's fine. The waitress poured coffee and left, and Lydia wrapped her hands around the cup to stop them from shaking. Ray and Caleb came in a few minutes later, taking seats at the counter like they'd planned. Ray ordered pie. Caleb ordered coffee. They looked like locals, like they belonged, and nobody gave them a second glance. At 1 o'clock exactly, Marcus walked in. He looked the same. That was the worst part. 3 years had changed Lydia, hardened her, aged her, left marks that didn't wash off. But Marcus looked exactly the same. Tall, handsome in a calculated way, wearing expensive clothes that were just casual enough to not look out of place. His eyes swept the diner, cataloging exits and witnesses before landing on her. He smiled. Lydia's hand tightened on her coffee cup so hard she thought it might break. Marcus crossed the diner in smooth, confident strides and slid into the booth across from her. Up close, she could see the differences 3 years had made. Lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark hair, a tightness to his jaw that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. Good. Lydia, you look, he paused, taking her in. Different. So do you. I doubt that. He flagged down the waitress, ordered coffee, and settled back into the booth like he owned it. This is quite the romantic spot you've chosen. Very you. I didn't choose it. You did. Semantics. He stirred sugar into his coffee, 3 packets exactly the way he always had. Let's talk about what happens next. Let's talk about why you won't leave me alone. I told you on the phone, you don't get to just leave. You don't get to steal 3 years of my life and disappear into the sunset like some kind of hero. I stole 3 years of your life? Lydia's voice rose before she controlled it. You stole 3 years of mine. You isolated me from my friends. You monitored my phone. You convinced me I was crazy every time I tried to push back against your control. And when I finally found the courage to leave, you put me in the hospital. Marcus's expression didn't change. That's your version of events. Mine is different. I have the scars to prove mine. Accidents happen, especially when people are being dramatic and breaking things. The gaslighting was immediate and familiar. For 3 years, she'd questioned her own memories, her own reality, because Marcus was so good at rewriting history. But she wasn't that person anymore. I'm not doing this, she said flatly. I'm not going to sit here and let you convince me that up is down and black is white. What do you want, Marcus? Really? He leaned forward and his eyes were cold. I want you to understand that you don't leave me. I decide when things are over. I decide what happens next. And right now, I'm deciding that you come back to Oklahoma City, you apologize publicly for the trouble you've caused, and you resume your place beside me. And if I refuse? Then I make your life very difficult. I have resources, Lydia. I have connections. I can make it so you never work again, never rent an apartment, never pass a background check. I can make you disappear in ways that don't involve you actually going anywhere. You can't do that. Can't I? He pulled out his phone and showed her a screen. It was a credit report, hers, with multiple flags and inquiries. I've already started. Every job you apply for gets a call from a concerned former employer. Every landlord gets a tip about your violent tendencies. You'll be amazed how quickly doors close when the right words are spoken. Lydia felt sick. That's illegal. Prove it. Oh wait, you can't, because you don't have the money for lawyers. You don't have the connections to fight back. You've got nothing, Lydia. Nothing except what I allow you to have. At the counter, Caleb's hand tightened on his coffee cup. Ray touched his arm, a small gesture that said, "Wait." "You're wrong," Lydia said quietly. "I do have something. I have my freedom. I have people who care whether I live or die. I have a place where I matter, even if it's just to 3 kids who need someone to make them breakfast." "That ranch?" Marcus laughed. "I've done my research. That place is 3 months from foreclosure. The owner's drowning in debt. And you think you found some kind of home there? It's more of a home than I ever had with you." His face went hard. "You're going to regret this. All of it. I'm going to make sure." "Is there a problem here?" Both of them looked up. Caleb stood beside the booth, his body language deceptively casual, but his eyes locked on Marcus. "No problem," Marcus said smoothly. "Just catching up with an old friend." Didn't look like a friendly conversation from where I was sitting. "Well, appearances can be deceiving." Marcus's smile never reached his eyes. "And you are?" "The owner of that failing ranch you were just talking about, Caleb Ridge." He extended his hand, and after a moment, Marcus shook it. "See, the thing about small towns is sound carries. And when someone talks about my property like they've been investigating it, I tend to take notice." Just making conversation." "Funny kind of conversation." Caleb didn't move. "Lydia, you about done here?" She nodded, relief flooding through her. Marcus's expression darkened. "We're not finished talking." "Yes, we are." Lydia slid out of the booth, and Caleb positioned himself between her and Marcus. "I'm not coming back. I'm not apologizing. And if you come near me or that ranch again, I'll file for a restraining order and document every single thing you just said. You think some small-town judge is going to care? I think it's worth finding out." She turned to go, but Marcus's voice stopped her. You're making a mistake, Lydia, a big one. And when that ranch fails and you've got nowhere else to run, don't come crawling back to me." She looked back at him one last time. "I'd rather live in my car than spend another minute under your control." They walked out together, Caleb close enough to touch, Ray a few steps behind, watching their backs. Marcus stayed in the booth, his face a mask of fury barely controlled. In the parking lot, Lydia's legs finally gave out. She leaned against Ray's truck, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Caleb's hand landed on her shoulder, steady and warm. "You did good," Ray said. "Got everything on tape. The threats, the admission of interference, all of it. He's going to come after me. After us." "Probably. But now we're ready for it." Ray opened the truck door. "Come on, let's get you home." The drive back was quiet. Lydia stared out the window, watching the landscape roll past, trying to process what had just happened. She'd faced Marcus. She'd stood her ground. She hadn't run. But the cost of that courage was still being calculated. They were 10 miles from the ranch when Ray's phone rang. He answered it on speaker, and Caleb's sister's voice filled the truck, high and panicked. "Caleb, someone's at your house. A man in a black truck. He's trying the doors." Caleb's face went white. "Where are the kids?" "Still with me. We haven't left the city yet, but I called the house when I couldn't reach you, and someone answered. It wasn't you." Ray was already accelerating, the truck engine roaring. "Call the sheriff. Tell him there's a break-in in progress. We're 15 minutes out." "Who is it?" Beth's voice was shaking. "Who's in their house?" "Someone who shouldn't be," Caleb said grimly. He pulled out his own phone, accessing something. "I've got cameras now. Ray installed them yesterday. Let me see." He pulled up the feed and his expression went dark. On the small screen, Lydia could see a man standing on the porch. Not Marcus, someone else. Bigger, harder, wearing work clothes that looked wrong on him. "That's Danny," Lydia said. "Marcus's cousin. He's the one who found me." "What's he doing at my house?" "Sending a message, showing us that Marcus can reach us whenever he wants." Ray took a turn fast enough to make the truck skid. "He won't be there by the time we arrive, and men like him don't stick around for confrontations. He'll poke around, leave evidence that he was there, and disappear." He was right. By the time they pulled up to the ranch, the black truck was gone. But the message had been delivered loud and clear. The front door was scratched around the lock where someone had tried to jimmy it. A window in the back was broken. And on the kitchen table, laid out like a calling card, was a photograph. Lydia picked it up with shaking hands. It was her, taken yesterday, hanging laundry in the yard. Someone had been watching. Someone had been close enough to photograph her without her knowing. On the back, in Marcus's handwriting, "You can't hide from me." Caleb took the photo from her and stared at it, his jaw working. "He was here, on my property, near my kids." "I'm sorry," Lydia whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have left. I should have—" "Stop!" Caleb's voice was firm. "This isn't your fault. This is his fault. And he just made a very big mistake." "What mistake?" "He underestimated how much I hate being threatened on my own land." Caleb pulled out his phone. "Ray, how do we turn this around? How do we make him regret coming after us?" Ray was examining the broken window, taking photos with his own phone. "We document everything. We file police reports. We get that restraining order Lydia mentioned. And we make it clear that we're not backing down." "That won't stop him," Lydia said. "Men like Marcus don't care about restraining orders." "No, but they care about public perception, about their reputation." Ray turned to face them both. "Marcus works in real estate development, right? High-end properties, business connections that depend on his image." "Yes." "Then we go public. We tell your story, show the harassment, make it impossible for him to operate in the shadows. Men like him thrive on secrecy. You take that away, you take their power." Lydia felt something shift in her chest. "You mean like press? Media?" "If necessary. But first, we try the legal route. We document, we file, we create a paper trail that makes it very clear what's happening here. And if he escalates, we escalate harder." The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, a man in his 60s with a skeptical face and tired eyes. He listened to their story, took notes, photographed the damage, and collected the photo Marcus had left. His expression grew increasingly dark as they talked. "You're telling me this man drove all the way from Oklahoma to harass you?" "Yes, sir." And he's got people watching this property? Apparently. The sheriff looked at Caleb. This connected to your troubles with Warren Kellerman? What? No, this is completely separate. You sure? Because from where I'm standing, you've got people coming at you from multiple directions. Makes a man wonder if there's a connection. Caleb and Lydia exchanged glances. They hadn't considered that possibility, but now that the sheriff mentioned it. Warren's been putting pressure on me to sell, Caleb said slowly. Increasing pressure, making vague threats about what happens if I don't cooperate. And this Marcus character, he's got resources, connections. The sheriff tapped his pen against his notepad. Might be worth looking into whether they know each other. After the sheriff left with promises to investigate and follow up, the three of them sat in the kitchen and looked at each other. Could they be working together? Lydia asked. It's possible, Ray said. Not likely, but possible. More probable is that Warren sees an opportunity. You're distracted by Marcus, Caleb's distracted by protecting you, and the ranch becomes even more vulnerable. So what do we do? Caleb stood up and paced to the window. We do what we should have done from the start. We stop being defensive and start being aggressive. Warren wants this land? Fine. We make it public how he's trying to get it. We contact every other rancher he's pushed out and we build a case showing his pattern of behavior. And Marcus wants to destroy your life? We destroy his reputation first. That's a lot of enemies to make at once, Ray warned. I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of losing ground every day and pretending it's fine. Caleb turned to face them. My wife spent her whole life building this place into something worth having. She fought cancer for 3 years and never once gave up. And here I am, letting it slip away because I'm too proud to fight dirty. He looked at Lydia. You stood up to your demon today. Maybe it's time I stood up to mine. Ray nodded slowly. All right, then here's what we do. Tomorrow, we start making calls. We contact a lawyer about Marcus. We contact every rancher in the county about Warren. We make noise. We make them both regret picking this fight. And in the meantime, Lydia asked, in the meantime, we secure this property like a fortress. More cameras, better locks, motion sensors on every approach. And we don't go anywhere alone. Not until this resolves. They worked through the evening, reinforcing doors and windows, setting up equipment that Ray had brought in his truck. By the time the kids came home, Beth dropping them off with wide eyes and whispered questions Caleb deflected, the ranch looked less like a home and more like a compound. Emma noticed immediately. What happened? Someone tried to break in while we were gone, Caleb said. They didn't get anything, but we're taking precautions. Was it that Marcus guy? Probably. Emma looked at Lydia with an expression that was equal parts fear and accusation. I told you she'd bring trouble. That's enough, Caleb said sharply. This isn't Lydia's fault any more than our money troubles are mine. Sometimes bad things happen to people who don't deserve them. What matters is how we respond. By turning our house into a prison? By protecting what's ours. He softened slightly. I know it's scary. I know it's not what you signed up for, but we're going to get through this. Together. Jesse and Maddie had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now Jesse spoke up. Is Lydia leaving? Everyone looked at her. She met their eyes. First Jesse's, then Maddie's, then Emma's skeptical gaze, and finally Caleb's steady one. No, she said firmly. I'm not leaving, not unless you want me to go. We don't, Jesse said immediately. Maddie shook her head, her eyes welling up. Even Emma, after a long moment, gave a small shrug. I guess you make okay cookies. It wasn't acceptance, but it was something. That night, Lydia lay in bed listening to the new sounds of the house, the soft beep of motion sensors, the quiet hum of cameras, the creaks and settles that now carried weight instead of just being background noise. Ray was sleeping in the living room, his gun within easy reach. Caleb was in his office, going through files and making lists of people to contact. And somewhere out there, Marcus was planning his next move. She should be terrified. She should be paralyzed with fear. Instead, she felt something else, something harder and sharper. She'd spent 3 years running, 3 years letting Marcus define her life by his absence. She'd let him chase her from city to city, job to job, always looking over her shoulder. But here, In this struggling ranch with its broken fences and desperate owner and 3 damaged kids, she'd finally found something worth standing still for. And she'd be damned if she let Marcus take it away. The lawyer's office was in a strip mall 40 miles east, sandwiched between a tax preparation service and a nail salon. His name was Gerald Moss, and according to Ray's research, he'd made a career out of representing people who couldn't afford the fancy firms. His office reflected that reality, cramped, cluttered with files, furniture that had seen better decades. But his eyes were sharp when Lydia laid out her story, and he took notes in quick, efficient strokes. "Restraining order is straightforward," he said when she'd finished. "You've got documentation of threats, photographic evidence of surveillance, witness testimony from the diner. Judge will grant it, no question." "But will it stop him?" Lydia asked. Moss leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously. "In my experience, no. Restraining orders are pieces of paper. They work on people who care about consequences. Your Marcus doesn't sound like that type. So what's the point?" "The point is creating a legal trail. When he violates it, and he will, you've got grounds for arrest, prosecution, escalation. Each violation makes the next step easier." He tapped his pen against the file. "The real question is whether you want to go further. Civil suit for harassment, defamation, interference with employment. Hit him where it actually hurts. His wallet and his reputation." Caleb, who'd driven her here, spoke up from his chair by the window. "How much would that cost?" "More than you've got, probably, but there are ways." Moss shuffled through some papers. "Contingency arrangements, pro bono networks, legal aid. If the case is strong enough, and yours is, we can make it work." "And how long would it take?" "Months, maybe a year." Moss looked at Lydia directly. "This isn't a quick fix. This is a long fight. You need to be prepared for that." Lydia thought about the last 3 years, constantly moving, always afraid. "I'm tired of running. If fighting takes a year, then it takes a year. So, good." Moss pulled out forms. "Let's start with the restraining order. We file today, hearings probably next week. In the meantime, you document everything. Every call, every sighting, every threat. You're building a case, and the more evidence you have, the stronger it gets." They spent 2 hours going through paperwork, signing forms, recounting incidents that Lydia had tried to forget. By the time they left, the sun was setting and Lydia felt wrung out. "You all right?" Caleb asked as they drove back. "I don't know. I keep thinking about what he said, that this could take a year. A year of looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to violate the order, documenting every threat." She stared out the window. "What if it never ends? What if he's always going to be there, just waiting for a chance?" "Then you deal with it when it comes, but you don't let the possibility of it control your whole life." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "My wife used to say that worry was just fear with nowhere to go. You could spend your whole life afraid of things that might happen, or you could live and handle the actual problems when they showed up." She sounds like she was smart. She was. Smarter than me, that's for sure. She'd have handled all of this better. The ranch troubles, the kids, Warren Kellerman. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Some days, I think if she'd lived, none of this would be falling apart." "You don't know that." "Don't I? The ranch started failing after she died. The kids started acting out after she died. I started making bad decisions after she died. Seems pretty clear where the common factor is." Lydia heard the guilt in his voice, heavy and familiar. She'd carried enough of her own to recognize it in someone else. You can't blame yourself for getting cancer, and you can't blame yourself for struggling after losing someone you loved. Who else is there to blame? Nobody. Sometimes bad things just happen and there's no one at fault. The world's just hard sometimes. He didn't respond, but something in his posture eased slightly. They drove the rest of the way in silence, and when they pulled up to the ranch, Ray was waiting on the porch with news. "Found something interesting," he said without preamble. "Spent the day doing research on Warren Kellerman, looking at his business dealings. Turns out he's bought up 7 ranches in this county in the last 3 years. Every single one was struggling financially when he made his offer. Every single one had mysterious problems right before the owner decided to sell." "What kind of problems?" Caleb asked. "Equipment failures, fence lines getting cut, water contamination, Small things, mostly, but enough to tip already struggling operations over the edge. Ray pulled out his tablet, showing them a spreadsheet. Look at the pattern. He makes an offer. Owner refuses. Within a month, something goes wrong. Another offer comes, higher this time. Owner either accepts or goes bankrupt trying to fight it. Lydia studied the screen. That's illegal. Proving it's illegal is the hard part. Each incident looks like bad luck or poor maintenance, but 7 times? That's not coincidence. Did you contact any of the other owners? Caleb asked. 3 of them. 2 wouldn't talk to me, signed NDAs as part of their sales agreements. But the third one, a man named Jim Brewster, he was willing to go on record. Says Warren's people sabotaged his irrigation system, cost him an entire season's crops. By the time he figured out what happened, he was so deep in debt he had no choice but to sell. Caleb's face had gone hard. You got proof? Jim's willing to testify, and he kept records, repair bills, incident reports, even some photos. It's not smoking gun evidence, but combined with the pattern, Ray gestured at the spreadsheet. It's enough to start asking serious questions. Questions to who? Sheriff, for starters, then maybe State Agricultural Board, Attorney General's office. Warren's been operating like he's untouchable. Time to prove he's not. That evening, while the kids did homework at the kitchen table, the 3 of them sat in Caleb's office and made a plan. Ray would continue researching Warren's business dealings, looking for more evidence of sabotage or illegal pressure. Caleb would reach out to the other ranchers Warren had targeted, try to convince them to talk despite their NDAs, and Lydia would handle the day-to-day running of the ranch while keeping her own situation with Marcus under control. It was ambitious and probably doomed to fail, but it was something. It was action instead of surrender. The restraining order hearing came 5 days later. Lydia sat in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and stale coffee while Moss presented their case to a judge who looked barely old enough to have graduated law school. Marcus wasn't there. He'd sent a lawyer instead, a slick man in an expensive suit who argued that his client was simply trying to maintain contact with someone he cared about. My client and Ms. Harrow had a committed relationship for 2 years, the lawyer said smoothly. When she left without explanation, it caused him considerable emotional distress. His attempts to reconnect have been misconstrued as harassment. Moss stood up. Your Honor, we have documented threats, evidence of surveillance, and witness testimony that Mr. Blake explicitly told Miss Harrow he would ruin her life if she didn't return to him. This isn't a man trying to reconnect. This is a man attempting to control and intimidate. The judge reviewed the evidence with a bored expression that didn't change even when he looked at the photo Marcus had left on the kitchen table. Finally, he made his ruling. Restraining order granted. Mr. Blake is to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Ms. Harrow and is prohibited from any form of contact, direct or indirect. Violation will result in immediate arrest. He banged his gavel. Next case. Outside the courthouse, Moss gave Lydia the paperwork. This gets served on him within 48 hours. After that, if he so much as sends you a text message, you call the police immediately. Will they actually do anything? They'll have to. It's a court order. Moss hesitated. But you should know, this might escalate things before it gets better. Some men see a restraining order as a challenge. I know. Back at the ranch, she found chaos. One of the goats had gotten into the garden and destroyed half of Maddie's vegetable plants. Jesse had failed a math test and was convinced the world was ending. Emma was locked in her room, refusing to come out or explain why. And Caleb was in the barn trying to fix the tractor that had chosen this particular day to break down completely. Lydia dealt with them one by one. She caught the goat and repaired the garden fence. She sat with Jesse and went through his math homework until the concepts started making sense. She made Emma's favorite dinner and left it outside her door with a note that said, "Food's out here when you're ready." By the time Caleb came in from the barn, covered in grease and frustration, she had the kitchen clean and a pot of coffee waiting. "Tractor's dead," he announced. "Transmission's completely shot. Replacement will cost $3,000 I don't have." "Can you fix it yourself?" "Maybe. If I had time and parts and any idea what I'm doing." He poured coffee with hands that shook slightly. "I'm drowning, Lydia. Every day something else breaks or fails or costs money I don't have. It's like the universe is determined to prove I can't do this." She wanted to tell him it would be okay, that they'd figure it out, but she was tired of empty reassurances. Then maybe you can't do it alone. Maybe you need to ask for help. From who? Everyone in this county either works for Warren or is afraid of him. The bank won't extend my credit, and I'm not taking charity. It's not charity if you're paying them back. With what? Hope and good intentions? The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Lydia set down her own coffee and looked at him directly. You know what I see when I look at this place? I see someone who's been fighting so hard for so long that he's forgotten there are other ways to fight. You've been doing everything the hard way, refusing help, refusing to compromise, refusing to admit that maybe the old way of doing things isn't working anymore. So what am I supposed to do? Sell out to Warren? Give up? No, you're supposed to adapt, change, find new revenue streams, new partners, new ways of making this place work. She gestured around the kitchen. Your wife built that goat herd from nothing, right? That means there's a market for them. Sell some. Use the money to fix the tractor and pay down debt. Then build the herd back up when you can afford to. I told you. I know what you told me. That they're her legacy and you won't touch them. But you know what's a worse legacy? Losing the entire ranch because you were too stubborn to make hard choices. Her voice softened. She loved this place. You said so yourself. So honor her by saving it, even if that means sacrificing something she built. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee and walked out without a word. Lydia stood alone in the kitchen, wondering if she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But an hour later, Caleb came back in with a notebook and sat down at the table. The dues with the best bloodlines, he said quietly. We keep those in the breeding buck. Everything else we sell. That's 12 goats. Should bring enough to fix the tractor and make a dent in the feed bill. Okay? And I'm calling Jim Brewster tomorrow. If he's willing to testify against Warren, maybe some of the others will too. Maybe we can build a coalition, fight him together instead of getting picked off one by one. That sounds like a good plan. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression was different. You're not what I expected when I hired you. What did you expect? Someone who'd last a week and leave, someone temporary, someone who wouldn't care enough to tell me hard truths. He paused. Someone who wouldn't matter. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Before Lydia could respond, Emma emerged from her room, eyes red from crying. Dad, can we talk? Caleb stood immediately. Of course, what's wrong? Emma glanced at Lydia, then back at her father. It's about Mom, and about everything. They went into the office, and Lydia heard their voices through the door. Emma's tearful and angry, Caleb's low and patient. After 20 minutes, Emma came out looking wrung out but calmer. She went straight to Lydia. I'm sorry for blaming you, for being mean. The words came fast, like she had to get them out before she changed her mind. It's not your fault you brought trouble here, and you've been good to us. Better than the other housekeepers. I miss her. And sometimes it's easier to be mad at someone I can actually yell at than someone who's gone. Lydia understood that completely. You don't have to apologize for grieving. Dad says you lost people too, that you understand what it's like. Yeah, I do. Emma nodded, then surprised Lydia by hugging her quickly before disappearing back to her room. Caleb appeared in the office doorway, looking exhausted. She needed to hear that it's okay to be angry, that her mother would want us to move forward, not stay frozen in grief. He rubbed his face. I should have had that conversation 2 years ago. You had it now. That's what matters. Over the next week, things started shifting. Caleb listed the goats for sale and got immediate interest. Apparently, his wife's breeding program had a reputation that extended beyond the county. Within 3 days, he'd sold all 12 for more than he'd expected, enough to fix the tractor and pay off the most pressing debts. Jim Brewster came to the ranch and spent an afternoon going through Warren's pattern of behavior with them. He brought documentation that was damning in its thoroughness, repair bills that showed sabotage, witness statements from workers who'd seen suspicious activity, even photos of equipment damage that couldn't have been accidental. Why didn't you fight him? Caleb asked. Because I was alone. One man against someone with money and power and connections. I didn't stand a chance. Jim looked around the kitchen table at Caleb, Lydia, and Ray. But if there's more of us, if we can show a pattern and bring in the authorities, that changes things. Ray had been compiling his own evidence, cross-referencing Warren's property acquisitions with incident reports from the sheriff's office. The pattern was undeniable once you knew to look for it. "We need to take this to someone who can actually do something," Ray said. "Sheriff's sympathetic but limited. We need state-level attention." "I might know someone," Jim said slowly. "Reporter at the Dallas paper. She did a series last year on corporate land grabs in rural Texas. This would be right up her alley." "Going to the press is risky," Caleb said. "Warren could sue us for defamation. Only if we're lying, and we're not." Ray tapped the pile of documentation. "This is solid. Multiple witnesses, clear pattern of behavior, documentary evidence. A good reporter could break this wide open." They debated for hours, weighing risks against potential rewards. In the end, it was Lydia who pushed them toward action. "You're all acting like you have time to be cautious. You don't. Caleb's 2 months from foreclosure even with the goat money. Warren's not going to wait patiently while you build a perfect case. And my situation with Marcus is only going to get worse." She looked at each of them. "Sometimes you have to take a risk and hope it works out." Jim made the call the next day. The reporter, a woman named Sarah Chen, drove out 2 days later. She was younger than Lydia expected, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a recording device she set on the table like a challenge. "Tell me everything," she said. They did. All of it. Warren's pattern of acquisitions, the suspicious incidents, Jim's testimony, the evidence Ray had compiled. Sarah took notes, asked pointed questions, and requested copies of everything they had. "This is good," she said finally. "Really good. I'll need to verify sources, get Warren's side of the story, do some additional digging. But if even half of this checks out, it's a major story." "How long before you publish?" Caleb asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I have to be thorough. A man like Warren will have lawyers looking for any excuse to shut this down." She paused. "You all need to understand once this goes public, there's no taking it back. Warren will know exactly who talked. He'll come after you hard." "He's already coming after us," Caleb said. "Might as well give him a reason." Sarah left with her copies and her notes, and they were left waiting. Waiting for the story to publish. Waiting for Warren's response. Waiting for Marcus to violate the restraining order. The waiting was almost worse than the action. Marcus made his move on a Tuesday. Lydia was at the store buying groceries when she saw him. Not in person, that would have been too obvious. But she saw his car, parked across the street, Danny behind the wheel watching her through the windshield. She'd been served the restraining order 3 days ago. This was a deliberate violation, a way of saying the court order meant nothing. Lydia went back to her truck and called the sheriff's office. 20 minutes later, a deputy arrived and approached Danny's car. By the time the deputy got there, Danny was gone. No proof he'd been there, no evidence of violation. But Lydia knew, and Marcus knew she knew. The messages started that night, not from Marcus directly, that would violate the order, but from numbers she didn't recognize. Text messages with photos of the ranch, of her truck, of the kids getting off the school bus. Each one a reminder that he could reach her whenever he wanted. She documented every single one, forwarding them to Moss and the sheriff. But documentation felt useless when the threat was so immediate and real. "He's escalating," Ray said, looking at the messages. "Testing boundaries, seeing what he can get away with." "So what do I do?" "You stay alert. You don't go anywhere alone. And you prepare for him to make a bigger move." The bigger move came 4 days later. Lydia was doing laundry when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, an engine running too loud, the sound of something breaking. She ran to the window and saw Warren Kellerman's truck in the driveway. Warren himself standing nose to nose with Caleb while 2 of his men unloaded something from the truck bed. She got outside just as Caleb's voice rose to a shout. "Get off my property, now!" "This is my property," Warren said calmly, "or it will be in 60 days when the bank forecloses. I'm just here to assess the condition of my future investment. You don't own it yet. Details." Warren gestured to his men, who were setting up surveying equipment. "I'm well within my rights to survey land I'm in negotiations to acquire." "We're not in negotiations. I told you no. And I told you that wasn't an option. Warren pulled out papers. This is a notice of intent to purchase, filed with the county. Once your foreclosure goes through, I have first right of refusal. Thought you'd want to know. Caleb grabbed the papers and scanned them. His face went white. This is dated 3 weeks ago. You filed this before you even knew if the bank would foreclose. I like to plan ahead. Warren smiled. Now, you can make this easy and accept my offer, walk away with something, or you can fight it, lose anyway, and end up with nothing. Your choice. Get out. Warren didn't move. You know what your problem is, Caleb? You think this is about the land. It's not. It's about knowing your place. Understanding that some people are meant to build empires and some people are meant to work for them. You could have had a good job working for me after the sale. But now? He shook his head. Now you've made it personal. That's when Lydia saw it. The moment Caleb's control snapped. He lunged forward, and it took Ray and both of Warren's men to pull them apart. Warren straightened his shirt, still smiling. Assault, in front of witnesses. Good to know. He got back in his truck. 60 days. Caleb, then this place is mine whether you like it or not. The truck drove away, leaving Caleb shaking with rage and the survey equipment abandoned in the yard. Ray picked it up and threw it into the barn. He's baiting you, Ray said, trying to make you do something stupid so he has legal grounds to force the sale faster. I don't care. You need to care. You've got 3 kids depending on you keeping it together. Caleb's hands were fists at his sides. He filed that notice 3 weeks ago, before the goat sale, before we had any of Jim's evidence, before we knew about the pattern. He was that confident I'd fail. He's been watching this place for months, probably years. He knew your financial situation better than you did. Ray put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. But here's what he doesn't know. He doesn't know about Sarah Chen. He doesn't know we've got evidence against him. He doesn't know we're not fighting alone anymore. Mato, that story won't publish for 2 more weeks. The foreclosure happens in 60 days. Even if Sarah destroys his reputation, it won't save the ranch. Lydia had been quiet during all of this, but now she spoke up. What if we don't wait for the foreclosure? What if we find a way to pay off the debt before then? With what money? Caleb asked bitterly. I sold the goats. We don't have any other assets worth that much. The land itself is an asset. Could you subdivide? Sell off a piece that's not essential to ranching operations? Warren would just buy it through a proxy, end up owning a chunk of my property anyway. Not if we sell it to someone who'd work with you, someone who needs land but would be willing to partner instead of compete. Lydia was thinking out loud now, pieces clicking together. What about Jim Brewster? He lost his place to Warren. Maybe he'd want a chance to start over on property Warren can't touch. Ray's eyes sharpened. That could work. Sell him 20 acres on the eastern section, the part that's too rocky for good grazing anyway. Use the money to pay down your mortgage enough that the bank pulls back from foreclosure. And Jim gets a fresh start while blocking Warren from acquiring the whole property. Caleb was starting to see it. But would he have that kind of money? Only one way to find out, Lydia said. They called Jim that night. He listened to the proposal in silence, then asked for 24 hours to talk to his bank. The next evening, he called back. I can do 15 acres at market rate. That's all my credit will cover. But I want a water rights agreement and a partnership option if you expand operations. Caleb looked at Ray and Lydia. That enough to stop the foreclosure? Ray did quick math on his phone. If you combine it with what you got from the goats and you negotiate a payment plan with the bank, yeah, it should be enough. The deal closed in 10 days. Jim got his 15 acres and the partnership agreement he wanted. Caleb got enough money to restructure his debt and push the foreclosure back indefinitely. And Warren Kellerman got the news that his guaranteed acquisition had just become very complicated. His response was swift and vicious. The day after the sale finalized, the main irrigation line to Caleb's cattle pasture was cut. Not broken, cut, clean and deliberate. 200 head of cattle lost access to their water source in the middle of a heat wave. Then the feed delivery that was supposed to arrive didn't. The supplier claimed they'd never received the order, even though Caleb had the confirmation email. Then someone reported Caleb to the agricultural department for alleged animal welfare violations. The inspector who showed up was apologetic but thorough, looking for any excuse to issue fines or citations. It's harassment. the inspector said quietly after finding nothing wrong. I've seen it before with Warren's competitors. He's trying to bury you in bureaucracy and small disasters until you give up. I'm not giving up. I know. That's why he'll keep escalating. The inspector packed up his equipment. Be careful. Men like Warren don't play fair, and they don't forgive. That night, Lydia found Caleb sitting on the porch in the dark, staring out at the land he was fighting so hard to keep. You should get some sleep, she said. Can't. Keep thinking about what's next. What he'll do next. She sat down beside him. You can't control what he does. You can only control how you respond. I'm tired of responding. I want to act. I want to hit back. Sarah's story will hit back for you. 2 more days and it publishes. 2 more days is a long time. He was quiet for a moment. You ever wonder if it's worth it, all this fighting? Every day. Then why do you keep doing it? Lydia thought about that, about Marcus and the 3 years running and the choice she'd made to stop. About this ranch and these kids and this man beside her who was too stubborn to quit even when quitting made sense. Because the alternative is letting someone else write your story, and I'm done with that. Caleb turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were shadows and questions. When this is over, if we survive it, what are you going to do? I don't know. I haven't thought past surviving it. You should. Think past it, Think about what comes after. Why? Because hope's important, because having something to fight for works better than just having something to fight against. He stood up, stretching. I'm going to check the cattle one more time. Lock up behind me? Yeah. After he left, Lydia sat alone with his words echoing in her head. What did come after? If they beat Marcus and Warren? If the ranch survived and her life became her own again? What then? She'd been running so long she'd forgotten how to imagine a future that involved staying in one place. But sitting here on this porch, listening to the night sounds of Texas, she was starting to remember, starting to want. It was terrifying. Sarah Chen's story hit the Dallas paper on a Thursday morning. The headline read, Corporate Land Grab, How One Developer Used Sabotage to Build an Empire. It was devastating. She'd found 5 more ranchers willing to talk, had documented 12 separate incidents of suspected sabotage, and had uncovered questionable financial dealings in Warren's acquisition process. By noon, the story had been picked up by 3 other major Texas papers. By evening, it was regional news. Warren's response came through his lawyers, a statement denying everything, threatening lawsuits, claiming the reporting was shoddy and biased. But the damage was done. The state attorney general's office announced an investigation. The county sheriff suddenly remembered all those incident reports he'd filed away and started reopening cases. And the bank that had been so eager to foreclose on Caleb's ranch called to discuss more flexible payment arrangements. It's working, Ray said, reading through the responses on his laptop. The pressure's actually working, but Lydia couldn't celebrate, because while Warren was being exposed, Marcus had gone quiet. No messages, no sightings, no violations of the restraining order. And that silence felt more dangerous than all his previous threats combined. He's planning something, she told Ray. I can feel it. Then we prepare. We stay vigilant. The attack came that night. Lydia was in her room when she heard the first crash, glass breaking somewhere in the house. She grabbed the revolver from her drawer and ran into the hallway just as Ray burst out of the living room. Someone's trying to break in through the kitchen window. Get the kids to the safe room. Now! She ran to Emma's room first, then Jesse's, gathering them quickly. Maddie was already awake and crying. Caleb appeared with the shotgun, his face grim. Pantry. Go. They got the kids locked in the safe room just as the kitchen window gave way completely. Lydia heard footsteps, multiple people, and her heart hammered against her ribs. Through the kitchen doorway, she saw shadows moving. 3 men, maybe 4. One of them was definitely Danny. This is private property, Caleb shouted. You're breaking and entering. Leave now or I'm shooting. We just want Lydia, Danny called back. Send her out and we leave. Nobody gets hurt. Not happening. Your choice. What happened next was chaos. Ray moved to flank them from the living room side while Caleb held the kitchen entrance. Lydia stayed low, trying to see how many there were and what they were armed with. Then she saw him, Marcus standing in the darkness of the yard beyond the broken window, watching. Not participating, he was too smart for that, but directing. This was his move, his escalation. She made a decision that was probably stupid, but felt necessary. She stood up where Marcus could see her through the window. "This is between you and me. Leave them alone." "Then come outside," Marcus called. "We'll talk. Just talk." "Lydia, don't—" Caleb started, but she was already moving to the back door. Ray grabbed her arm. "That's exactly what he wants." "I know, but if I don't, he'll keep pushing until someone gets hurt." She looked at the pantry door, knowing 3 scared kids were behind it. "I can't let that happen." She opened the back door and stepped into the night, hands visible and empty. Marcus stood 20 feet away, and even in the darkness she could see his smile. "There she is. My Lydia. I knew you'd be reasonable. I'm not yours. I never was. And this ends tonight." "You're right about that." His smile widened. "You're going to come with me, willingly, and tell everyone this was all a misunderstanding. You're going to drop the restraining order and publicly apologize for the trouble you've caused, and then we're going to go home and sort out our issues like adults. Or I burn this place down with everyone in it. Starting with that rancher's kids." Lydia felt ice in her veins. "You wouldn't." "Try me. I've already got men placing accelerant around the barn and the house. One phone call and this whole property goes up. You think rural fire response is going to get here in time? You think anyone in there survives?" He was insane, his thing. She'd known he was controlling, possessive, dangerous, but this level of premeditated violence was beyond what she'd imagined. "You'll go to prison," she said, stalling for time. "Will I? I'm not doing anything. My associates are simply having a conversation with you. If a fire breaks out on an old ranch with faulty wiring, that's just tragic coincidence." He took a step closer. "Last chance, Lydia. Come with me now, or I make that call." She saw movement behind Marcus, Ray, circling wide through the darkness. But there were 4 of Marcus's men and only 3 of them. The math wasn't good. "Okay," she said, loud enough for Ray to hear. "Okay, I'll come with you. But you have to call off your men first. Tell them to leave the ranch alone." Marcus pulled out his phone. "See how reasonable you can be when motivated?" That's when the sirens started. The sound came from multiple directions. Sheriff's Department, state police, even fire rescue. Lights flooded the access road, vehicles pouring onto the property. Marcus's expression went from triumphant to confused to furious in seconds. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything." But Lydia was looking past him at the cars, at the officers pouring out, at the sheriff himself approaching with a bullhorn. "This is Sheriff Davies. You are surrounded. Drop any weapons and come out with your hands visible." Marcus's men bolted, scattering into the darkness. Danny made it about 20 yards before a deputy tackled him. The others were rounded up quickly, efficiently. Marcus stood frozen, watching his plan fall apart. Then he turned on Lydia. "You called them." "I didn't, I swear." "But someone had." And as the sheriff approached, Lydia saw who was riding in the passenger seat of his cruiser. Jim Brewster climbed out, looking satisfied. "Figured you might try something after the story published. Asked the sheriff to keep extra patrols on the property. Good thing he listened." "Boom," the sheriff himself approached Marcus. "Marcus Blake? You're under arrest for criminal trespass, attempted kidnapping, terrorist threats, and violation of a restraining order. You have the right to remain silent." Lydia stopped listening to the Miranda rights and focused on breathing, on the fact that Marcus was being handcuffed, that his men were being arrested, that this nightmare might actually be ending. Caleb appeared at her side, the shotgun lowered but still in his hands. "You okay?" "I think so." "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen, walking out here alone." "Probably. Don't do it again." "I'll try." They stood together and watched the police load Marcus and his men into various vehicles. Marcus looked back at her once, his face twisted with rage, and mouthed something that looked like, "This isn't over." But it was over. It had to be. The police cleared out around 3 in the morning, taking statements and collecting evidence. The kitchen window needed boarding up. The kids needed to be coaxed out of the safe room and reassured. and Lydia needed to sit down before her legs gave out completely. Ray made coffee while Caleb dealt with the kids. Emma was the hardest to calm. She'd heard everything through the pantry door and was alternating between tears and fury. Jessie just wanted to know if they could finally go to bed. Maddie wouldn't let go of Caleb's hand. By dawn, things had settled into an exhausted quiet. The kids were asleep. Ray was dozing on the couch. And Lydia found herself back on the porch, watching the sun come up over land that had almost burned tonight. Caleb joined her with 2 cups of coffee. Sheriff says Marcus is looking at serious time, especially with the pattern of harassment we'd already documented. Add in tonight's charges and they might actually keep him locked up for a while. Good. You should feel relieved. I will. Eventually. Right now I just feel tired. They drank their coffee in silence, watching the morning paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. What you said earlier, Caleb said finally, about this being between you and him, about coming outside. I know it was stupid. It was brave. Stupid, yes, but also brave. He set down his coffee. I spent 3 years hiding from the hard choices, pretending if I just held on long enough, things would fix themselves. But you've been here 6 weeks and you've faced more hard choices than most people face in years. And you've made them, even when they scared you. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You chose to stop running. You chose to stand and fight. He looked at her directly. You chose us. The words sat between them, heavy with meaning. Lydia didn't know how to respond, so she didn't, just sat there beside him as the sun climbed higher and the ranch woke up around them, battered but still standing. Still theirs. The week after Marcus's arrest passed in a strange haze. Lydia found herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some new threat to emerge, but nothing came. Marcus remained in county lockup on multiple charges, his bail set high enough that even his resources couldn't cover it immediately. Danny and the others had already taken plea deals in exchange for testimony against him. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on ground that might still give way. Warren Kellerman went quiet too, though for different reasons. Sarah Chen's article had triggered investigations at multiple levels: county, state, even federal, since some of his land acquisitions had involved agricultural subsidies. His lawyers were scrambling, issuing denials and counterstatements, but the damage to his reputation was spreading like cracks in ice. 3 ranchers he'd been pressuring suddenly found the courage to refuse his offers. 2 others who'd already sold were exploring whether they could reverse the transactions based on fraud. And the bank that had been so eager to foreclose on Caleb's property was now bending over backward to accommodate payment restructuring. He's done, Jim Brewster said during a visit to the ranch. Maybe not legally, not yet, but in this county, he's finished. Nobody's going to do business with him now, not after everyone knows his methods. Caleb wasn't celebrating. Men like Warren don't go down easy. He'll find a way to strike back. Then we'll handle it when it comes. Jim looked around the kitchen at the boarded-up window that hadn't been replaced yet. You folks have been through hell. Maybe it's time to take a breath and let the legal system do its job. But breathing wasn't something any of them seemed capable of doing yet. Ray stayed on at the ranch, unwilling to leave until he was sure Marcus's arrest would stick. The kids were jumpy, waking up at odd hours, asking questions nobody had good answers for. And Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd brought all this destruction down on people who'd only tried to help her. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor, harder than it needed, taking out frustration on grout that didn't deserve it, when Emma found her. You're going to wear a hole in the tile. Lydia sat back on her heels. Just trying to get it clean. It's been clean for 20 minutes. Now you're just punishing it. Emma leaned against the counter. Dad does that too when he's upset. Finds work that doesn't need doing and does it anyway. I'm fine. You're not. None of us are. Emma slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the cabinets. Jesse wet the bed last night. He hasn't done that in 2 years. Maddie won't sleep unless someone's in the room with her. And I keep checking the locks even though I know Ray installed new ones. Lydia set down the scrub brush. I'm sorry. This is my fault. That's what I used to think too. That everything was someone's fault, and if I could just figure out whose, I could fix it. Emma pulled her knees up to her chest. But Dad explained something to me the other night. He said sometimes bad things happen because bad people exist, and the only fault is theirs, not the people they hurt. Your dad's smart. Sometimes. Other times he's an idiot. Emma smiled slightly. But he's right about this. You didn't ask for Marcus to be crazy. You didn't ask for Warren to target our ranch. You just happened to be here when it all came to a head. Still feels like I brought a storm to your door. Maybe, but you also helped us weather it. You stood up to both of them when you could have run. You put yourself between them and us. Emma's voice got quieter. Mom used to say that's what family does. They stand together when things get hard. The word family hung in the air between them, unexpected and enormous. Emma, I'm not saying you're my mom or anything weird like that. I'm just saying, you're here, and you stayed when it got bad. That means something. Before Lydia could respond, Emma stood up and left, disappearing down the hallway. Lydia sat alone on the kitchen floor, scrub brush forgotten, trying to process what had just happened. That evening, Moss called with an update on Marcus's case. Prosecutors offering him a deal. Plead guilty to the restraining order violations and trespassing. They'll drop the kidnapping and terrorist threat charges. He'd do 18 months, probably out in 12 with good behavior. Lydia's stomach dropped. That's it? After everything he did? The kidnapping charge is shaky because you did technically walk outside on your own. And the terrorist threats are hard to prove since he didn't actually set any fires or directly state he would. It's all implication and intimidation. Moss sounded frustrated. I know it's not what you want to hear, but 12 months in prison plus a felony conviction is significant. He'll lose professional licenses, won't be able to own firearms, will have trouble getting employment. But he'll get out, and when he does, you'll have a permanent restraining order, and he'll know that violating it means immediate prison time. That's real consequences, Lydia. More than most abusers ever face. She knew Moss was right, knew that the system was doing what it could, but the thought of Marcus being free again in a year made her skin crawl. Does he have to accept the deal? His lawyer's pushing him too. If he goes to trial and loses, he's looking at 5 to 10 years. But if he rejects it, Moss paused. Then we go to trial, and you have to testify. In front of him, reliving everything. I can do that if I have to. I know you can. Question is whether you should have to. He was quiet for a moment. Think about it. Talk to the people around you, but don't take too long. Prosecutor wants an answer by Friday. After hanging up, Lydia found herself back on the porch. It had become her thinking spot, the place she went when the walls felt too close. The sun was setting, painting the land in shades of amber and copper, and for a moment she could see what Caleb's wife must have loved about this place. The vastness of it. The way it made human problems feel small against the scope of earth and sky. Caleb found her there an hour later, 2 beers in hand. He offered her one without asking if she wanted it. Heard you on the phone earlier, sounded tense. She told him about the plea deal, about the choice she had to make. He listened without interrupting, drinking his beer and staring out at his land. What do you want to do? He asked finally. I don't know. Part of me wants to fight, to make him face a jury and hear everything he did. But another part just wants it over, wants to move on and stop letting him control my life. Both of those are valid. Thanks, that's helpful. She couldn't keep the sarcasm out. Caleb smiled slightly. You want my actual advice? Sure. Take the deal, not because he deserves it, but because you do. You deserve to close this chapter and start fresh without having to relive trauma in a courtroom. He took another drink. I spent 3 years refusing to move forward because it felt like betraying my wife. Like if I started living again, I was saying her death didn't matter. Finally figured out that the best way to honor her was to live the kind of life she would have wanted for me and the kids. And have you been living that life? I'm trying. Some days are better than others. He turned to look at her. Point is, you get to choose what comes next. Marcus doesn't get that power anymore unless you give it to him. They finished their beers in comfortable silence, and when Lydia went inside to call Moss back, she knew what her answer would be. The plea deal was finalized 3 days later. Marcus would serve 18 months minimum, 5 years probation after release, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order. It wasn't perfect, but it was done. Lydia felt something loosen in her chest when Moss gave her the news. Not relief exactly, that would come later maybe, but space. Room to breathe that hadn't been there before. Warren Kellerman's situation was resolving too, though more slowly. The Attorney General's investigation had uncovered financial irregularities in his land acquisitions, questionable relationships with county officials, and a pattern of intimidation that bordered on racketeering. His empire wasn't falling overnight, but it was certainly crumbling. The ranchers he'd targeted were banding together, forming a cooperative that would allow them to share resources and negotiate better prices for supplies. Jim Brewster was leading it, and he'd approached Caleb about joining. "Strength in numbers," Jim had said. "No more getting picked off one by one. We work together, support each other, and tell people like Warren to go to hell." Caleb had agreed, though Lydia could see it cost him something. He'd been independent for so long, asking for help or accepting partnership didn't come naturally, but he was learning. They all were. 2 weeks after Marcus's plea deal, Ray announced he was heading back to Oklahoma. "You folks don't need me anymore. You've got security in place, threats neutralized, and honestly, I've got other people who need help." Lydia walked him to his truck. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "Yeah, you could have. Maybe not the same way, but you'd have found a path." He threw his bag in the truck bed. "You're tougher than you give yourself credit for, Lydia. Always have been." "I never felt tough when I was running." "Running took guts, too. Takes guts to survive. What you did here was different. You stopped surviving and started living. That's harder." He climbed into the truck. "You've got my number. Use it if you need anything, but my guess is you won't need to." After he drove away, the ranch felt emptier, but also more settled, like they'd weathered the storm and were finally assessing what remained. What remained was work. Always work. The ranch didn't care about legal battles or personal drama. It still needed tending. Fences still needed mending. Animals still needed feeding. Equipment still needed fixing. Lydia threw herself into it, learning as she went, making mistakes and fixing them and learning from those too. Emma started teaching her about the remaining goats, explaining bloodlines and breeding schedules with the kind of technical knowledge that reminded Lydia of her mother. "Mom was going to expand the herd, but," Emma said one afternoon while they cleaned out the goat shelter. "She had plans for a cheese operation, maybe selling at farmers markets." "Why didn't your dad continue it?" "Because it was hers. He said he couldn't do it justice." Emma paused in her shoveling. "But maybe we could. You and me. Start small, see if there's still a market." It was the first time Emma had suggested any kind of future that included Lydia, and the weight of that trust nearly knocked her over. "I don't know anything about making cheese." "Neither do I. We'd figure it out." Emma went back to work. "Mom used to say the best businesses start with people willing to learn and too stubborn to quit. Sounds like us." Lydia found herself smiling. "Yeah, sounds like us." That night at dinner, a real dinner, with everyone at the table in actual conversation instead of tense silence, Caleb brought up the subject of the ranch's future. "We're stable now, not thriving, but stable. We've got the debt restructured, partnership with Jim's cooperative, and enough breathing room to actually plan instead of just reacting." He looked around the table. "So I want to know what you all think we should do next. This place belongs to all of us. You should have a say." And Jesse immediately suggested getting more chickens. "We could sell eggs. People like fresh eggs." Maddie, in her quiet way, mentioned that the garden could be bigger. "We could grow more vegetables. Maybe sell those too." Emma presented her cheese idea, complete with notes she'd apparently been making. "There's a market for artisanal goat cheese within 50 miles. 3 farmers markets, 2 co-op stores, and 5 restaurants that buy local. Mom had all the research done. We just need to execute." Caleb listened to all of it, and then he looked at Lydia. "What about you? What do you think?" She hadn't expected to be asked, hadn't expected her opinion to matter in decisions about the ranch's future. "I think all of those ideas are good. I think we should start small with whichever one has the lowest barrier to entry and build from there." "Which is?" "Probably the eggs. We already have chickens, we just need more and better housing for them. Jesse could manage it as his project." Jesse's eyes went wide. "Really? My project? If you're willing to do the work." Feeding, cleaning, collecting eggs, keeping records. It would be real responsibility. I can do it. I will do it. Caleb nodded. All right. We start with eggs. Once that's running smoothly, we look at expanding the garden. And Emma, you research the cheese operation more. Costs, equipment needed, regulations. If the numbers work, we try it. The kids were excited in a way Lydia hadn't seen before, like they finally had something to look forward to instead of just problems to survive. After dinner, they scattered to their rooms to plan and research, leaving Caleb and Lydia to clean up. You're good with them, Caleb said, washing while she dried. They're good kids. Makes it easy. They weren't always easy. After Sarah died, they were angry and confused and took it out on everyone around them, especially anyone who tried to help. He handed her a plate. You didn't let that scare you off. I've dealt with worse. I know, but still. He was quiet for a moment. Ray told me before he left that you saved us. Said without you pushing me to sell the goats, to reach out to Jim, to fight instead of just endure, we'd have lost everything by now. Ray gives me too much credit. Does he? Caleb turned to face her, his hands still wet from the dishwater. Lydia, you showed up here with nothing but a bag and a past you were running from. And somehow, in the middle of fighting your own battles, you found time to care about ours, to push us to be better, to stand between us and people who wanted to hurt us. His voice got quieter. Why? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said over the past 2 months. Lydia set down the dish towel and met his eyes. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. Like what I did made a difference. Like I was part of something bigger than just surviving. She paused. Because you and those kids gave me a reason to stop running. Caleb's expression shifted, something vulnerable showing through the usual hardness. You matter to us, more than you probably realize. I'm starting to figure that out. They stood there in the kitchen, the space between them charged with possibility. Caleb moved first, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, careful, like he was afraid she might bolt. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. Haven't thought about anyone this way since Sarah. Don't even know if I should be thinking about it now. We don't have to figure it out tonight. No, but eventually. He let the sentence trail off, but his hand was still near her face, and Lydia found herself leaning into the touch without thinking. Before either of them could move further, footsteps thundered down the hallway, and Jessie burst into the kitchen, breathless and excited. I found a supplier for chicken coops. They've got a sale this weekend. Can we go look? The moment broke, but the awareness of it lingered as Caleb turned his attention to his son, and Lydia went back to drying dishes. Whatever was building between them wasn't going away. It was just waiting for the right time. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Jesse threw himself into the chicken operation with the kind of intensity only a 9-year-old could muster. He read books on egg production, made charts of different breeds, and begged to visit every chicken farm within driving distance. Caleb indulged him, and slowly the flock grew. Emma researched cheese-making with equal fervor, filling notebooks with calculations and recipes and business projections. She and Lydia made a test batch using milk from a neighboring dairy, and while it wasn't perfect, it was edible and showed potential. Even Maddie got involved, taking over the garden expansion with quiet determination. She worked the soil, planted seeds, and tended them with a patience that reminded Lydia of someone twice her age. The ranch was transforming, not overnight, not dramatically, but in small, steady increments that added up to something real. And Lydia was part of it in ways that felt permanent instead of temporary. She'd been there 3 months when the official letter arrived from the county clerk. Her legal name change had been approved. She was no longer Lydia Harrow, the name she'd taken in desperation 3 years ago. She was Lydia Cross, a name she'd chosen for herself, a name that meant something new. Cross? Emma asked when Lydia mentioned it. Like standing at a crossroads? Like finding the right path after being lost for a long time. Emma considered this. I like it. It suits you. That weekend, they had their first farmer's market booth. Jesse's egg operation had produced enough surplus to sell, and Emma had made 3 small batches of goat cheese that she insisted were ready. Maddie contributed vegetables from the garden, tomatoes, peppers, squash that had grown faster than anyone expected. Caleb built them a simple booth setup, and Lydia painted a sign: Ridge Ranch, fresh eggs, vegetables, artisan cheese. The market was small, just 12 vendors in a church parking lot, but it was packed with people looking for local food. Their booth attracted immediate attention. Fresh eggs always sold well, and Emma's cheese was unusual enough to draw curiosity. By noon, they'd sold out of everything. "We need to bring more next week," Emma said, counting money with barely contained excitement. "Like twice as much." Jesse was already planning his expansion. "I need at least 10 more hens, maybe 15. Even Maddie was smiling, a rare and beautiful sight. Caleb pulled Lydia aside while the kids repacked the truck. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "It means we're not just surviving anymore. We're actually building something." He looked at his kids, all of them animated and happy in a way they hadn't been in years. Sarah would have loved this, seeing them excited about the ranch again. "You've done a good job with them." "We've done a good job." The correction was gentle but firm. "You're part of this, Lydia. Part of us. I know we haven't talked about what that means long term, but—" "Dad!" Jesse called. "Can we stop for ice cream on the way home?" Caleb smiled. "Yeah, we can stop for ice cream." The conversation was left unfinished, but Lydia felt its weight carrying forward. That evening, after ice cream and the kids were in bed and the house was quiet, she found herself alone with Caleb on the porch again. It had become their spot, the place where real conversations happened. "What you said earlier," Lydia started. "About me being part of this. Part of you." "Yeah?" "I need you to understand something." She turned to face him. "I came here broken, running from someone who almost destroyed me. I didn't think I'd ever feel safe anywhere again, or trust anyone, or want to stay in one place. And now? Now I want to stay. Here with you and those kids. But I'm still scared, still waiting for something to go wrong, still half convinced I'm going to wake up and this will all be gone." Caleb reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough from work, warm and solid. "It's not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere, and neither are you unless you choose to. What if I'm not good at this? At staying, at being part of a family, at all of it? Then you learn. We all learn together." He squeezed her hand. "Lydia, I spent 3 years thinking I had to do everything alone because asking for help meant admitting I couldn't handle it. You taught me that's garbage, that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. So let me return the favor. You don't have to be perfect at this. You just have to show up and try." She looked at their joined hands, at the physical proof that she wasn't alone anymore. "I can do that." "Good." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Because I've got something to show you." He led her to the barn, to a section that had been locked since she'd arrived. He opened it now, and inside was a workshop, dusty and unused but full of potential. Tools hung on walls. A workbench sat ready. Space waited to be filled. "This was Sarah's," Caleb said. "She built things. Furniture mostly, some art. She'd spend hours out here creating." He ran his hand along the workbench. "I locked it up after she died because I couldn't stand to see it empty. But I've been thinking, it shouldn't stay empty. It should be used. For what? Whatever you want. The cheese operation needs equipment. Racks, molds, aging space. This could be the start of it." He looked at her. "Or it could be something else entirely. Your choice. But I'm offering it to you, a space that's yours." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. Nobody had ever given her space before. Marcus had taken it, controlled it, defined what she could and couldn't do with it. But this was different. This was Caleb saying she belonged here permanently enough to have her own territory. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet. Place is a disaster. Going to take work to make it usable." "I'm good at work?" He smiled. "Yeah, you are." They stood in the doorway of the workshop, imagining futures, and for the first time in 3 years, Lydia let herself believe in the possibility of one. The next month brought its own challenges, but they were normal challenges, the kind that came with running a ranch and raising kids and building businesses. Jesse's chicken operation exploded in productivity. requiring a second coupe and more complex logistics. Emma's Cheese was gaining a following, with 2 restaurants placing regular orders. Maddie's Garden produced more than they could sell, so they started preserving, canning, pickling, freezing. The workshop became Lydia's domain. She and Emma set up cheese-making equipment, watched YouTube tutorials, made mistakes, and learned from them. The space transformed from dusty memorial to active workspace, and with it, Lydia transformed too. She wasn't the woman who'd stepped off that bus 4 months ago. That woman had been scared, beaten down, desperate. This woman had calluses on her hands and confidence in her step. This woman had people who depended on her and work that mattered. This woman had a home. Warren Kellerman's legal troubles continued to mount. The Attorney General's investigation had uncovered enough evidence to bring charges: fraud, intimidation, tax evasion. His trial was scheduled for the following year, but his business empire had already collapsed. Properties were being sold off to cover legal fees. Partners were distancing themselves. The man who'd once controlled half the county was now fighting just to stay out of prison. Some people felt sorry for him. Lydia wasn't one of them. Marcus sent a letter from prison. Lydia found it in the mailbox one afternoon, her name and the ranch address written in his precise handwriting. Her hands shook as she held it, and for a long moment she considered throwing it away unopened. Instead, she brought it to Caleb. "I don't know if I should read it." "Do you want to?" "No, but maybe I need to." They read it together, sitting at the kitchen table. It was 3 pages of Marcus explaining how he'd realized his mistakes, how prison had given him time to reflect, how he understood now that he'd been too controlling. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped they could eventually have a civil conversation. He asked about her life, whether she was happy, if she'd found what she was looking for. "It's manipulation," Caleb said when they'd finished. "Every word designed to make you feel guilty or sympathetic or like you owe him something." "I know." Lydia folded the letter carefully. "But it doesn't work anymore. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel sympathetic. I just feel done." "Then be done with it. With him." Caleb took the letter and fed it into the wood stove, where it caught and burned. "You don't owe him anything. Not closure, not conversation, not a single thought." Watching the letter burn felt final in a way the plea deal hadn't. That had been legal closure. This was emotional closure. Marcus was her past, and her past was ash. Winter came to the ranch, not harsh but present. The landscape that had been brown and dusty turned brown and cold, with frost painting patterns on windows and breath steaming in morning air. Work didn't stop. Animals still needed tending, winter markets still needed attending, but it slowed to a sustainable pace. The kids thrived. Jesse's confidence grew along with his chicken operation. Emma was already planning spring expansions for the cheese business. Maddie spoke more, smiled more, seemed to be healing in ways that weren't quite visible but were definitely real. And Caleb was different too. Less burdened, more present. He laughed more, usually at Jesse's jokes or Emma's sarcasm. He'd started playing guitar again, something he'd given up after Sarah died, and sometimes in the evenings music would drift from the living room. Lydia found herself folding into the family in ways that felt natural instead of forced. She helped with homework and attended school conferences. She negotiated with restaurant buyers and managed the farmers market schedule. She fixed broken things and planned for future things and lived in present things. One evening, after the kids were asleep and she and Caleb were cleaning up from dinner, he asked the question she'd been half expecting. "What happens when your year is up?" She'd been hired for room, board, and $50 a week. That year would end in 8 months. "I don't know. What happens? I'd like you to stay. Not as hired help, but as..." He struggled for the word. "As whatever you want to be. Partner in the business. Co-parent to the kids. More than that if you're interested." There it was. The offer she'd been hoping for and terrified of in equal measure. What does more than that mean? He set down the dish he was holding and turned to face her fully. "It means I've fallen in love with you. Slowly. Probably too slowly, but completely. It means I want to build a life with you. Not because I need help running the ranch or raising the kids, but because you make everything better just by being here." Lydia's heart was hammering. "Caleb, you don't have to answer now. Take time. Think about it. Just know that whatever you decide, you've got a home here, always. But she didn't need time. She'd already decided, somewhere between fixing fences and fighting Marcus and watching Emma smile over successful cheese. She'd decided when she stopped running, when she chose to stand and fight, when she let herself imagine futures instead of just surviving presents. "I love you too," she said, and watched his face transform. "I don't know how to be in a relationship that's healthy. I don't know how to trust someone completely. I'm going to mess up and push you away when things get hard because that's what I know how to do. But I want to try. I want to stay and build this life with you and those kids and this land. I want all of it." He kissed her then, gentle and careful and full of promise. And Lydia kissed him back, knowing she was choosing something terrifying and wonderful and real. They broke apart at the sound of giggling. All three kids stood in the hallway, Emma with her phone out recording, Jesse grinning like he'd won the lottery, and Maddie just smiling her quiet smile. "Finally," Emma said. "We've been waiting for you two to figure this out for months." "You knew?" Caleb asked. "Dad, everyone knew. You two were painfully obvious." She stopped recording. "But we approve. For the record." Jesse nodded enthusiastically. "Does this mean Lydia's staying forever?" Lydia looked at them. These three kids who'd let her into their broken family and helped her become whole again. "If that's okay with you." "It's okay," Maddie said softly. "We want you to stay." And just like that, Lydia Cross had a family, not the one she'd been born into or the one she'd tried to build with Marcus, but the one she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back. Broken people building something new from the ruins of what came before. The ranch was theirs now, all of theirs. And whatever came next, they'd face it together. Spring came to the ranch like a promise being kept. The land that had looked so harsh and unforgiving when Lydia first arrived softened with new growth, wildflowers pushing up through hard soil, trees that had seemed dead all winter suddenly budding with green. It was still Texas, still brutal in its own way, but beautiful too if you knew how to look at it. Lydia had learned how to look at it, had learned a lot of things in the 6 months since that night in the kitchen when everything changed. Living with Caleb wasn't easy. He had moods, dark days when grief pulled him under and he withdrew into himself. Days when he snapped at the kids over nothing, when he worked himself into exhaustion rather than deal with feelings. Lydia recognized those patterns because she had her own version. Nights when panic woke her at 3 a.m, convinced Marcus had found a way out of prison. Moments when someone moved too fast or spoke too loud and she flinched before she could stop herself. But they were learning to navigate each other's damage. Learning that love wasn't about being perfect or healed or whole. It was about showing up broken and choosing to stay anyway. The ranch cooperative Jim Brewster had organized was thriving in ways none of them had expected. 12 ranchers now, pooling resources and knowledge, negotiating better deals with suppliers, supporting each other through rough seasons. They met monthly, rotating between properties, and the sense of community it created was something Caleb admitted he should have sought years ago. "Pride, Huntum," he'd said one night after a meeting. "I thought asking for help made me weak. Thought I had to prove I could do it all alone. What a waste of time." Warren Kellerman's trial had come and gone. He'd been convicted on multiple counts, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His properties had been sold off to cover restitution and legal fees. The ranchers he'd pushed out couldn't get their land back. Those sales had been legal even if the methods were dirty, but at least he couldn't hurt anyone else. The day the verdict came down, Lydia and Caleb had driven out to Jim Brewster's new 15 acres and helped him break ground on a house. It felt right, building something where Warren had tried to destroy everything. Emma's cheese operation had expanded beyond anything they'd imagined. She'd hired 2 part-time helpers from town, taught herself food safety regulations, and gotten the operation certified. Ridge Ranch Artisan Cheese was now in 17 stores and 9 restaurants. She was 15 years old and running a legitimate business, and the pride on Caleb's face when he talked about her was something to see. Jesse's chicken operation had grown too, though not without setbacks. They'd lost 30 birds to a coyote attack one night, and Jesse had cried for hours. But he'd learned from it, improved his coops, added better fencing. Now he had 90 laying hens and a waiting list for his eggs. Maddie had found her calling in the garden. She'd expanded it to nearly an acre, planted fruit trees that wouldn't produce for years but represented faith in the future. She worked the soil with a patience that amazed everyone, and when she did speak, which was more often now, it was usually about growing things, about seasons and cycles, and the way patience got rewarded. The workshop Caleb had given Lydia had become the heart of Emma's operation, but Lydia had claimed a corner for herself. She'd started building things, simple stuff at first, shelves and boxes, but getting more ambitious as her skills grew. She'd built a chicken coop for Jessie that was better than anything store-bought, had made Maddie a potting bench that the girl used every day, was working on a dining table big enough for all of them plus guests, because the family was growing in ways that required more space. Jim came by regularly now, sometimes with his girlfriend, a widow named Patricia who'd lost her own ranch to Warren years before. They were talking about merging their properties, creating something bigger together. Ray called every few weeks to check in, always with stories about other people he was helping, other Lydias who needed someone to stand with them. And through it all, Lydia and Caleb were building something that felt solid even when it was hard. They fought sometimes. About money, about the kids, about whether to expand the goat herd again or focus on what they had. But they fought fair and they fought together, and they always came back to the same truth. They were better as a team than they'd ever been alone. Marcus was released from prison on a Tuesday in April. Lydia got the notification from the parole office. He'd served 14 months, gotten out early for good behavior. The terms of his parole included staying in Oklahoma, maintaining the restraining order distance, mandatory counseling, and electronic monitoring. She'd known this day was coming, had prepared for it mentally, but actually seeing the notification made her hands shake. Caleb found her sitting on the porch, staring at her phone. "He's out." Caleb sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Okay. What if he violates parole? What if he comes here? Then he goes back to prison for a long time. And if he shows up before the cops arrive, he deals with me." Caleb's voice was calm, certain. "But he won't. Men like Marcus are bullies, and bullies move on to easier targets once they realize they can't break you." "You sound sure." "I am sure, because you're not the woman he knew anymore. You're not alone, not scared, not running. You've got people who'd go to war for you." He took her hand, "Including me." Lydia leaned into him, letting his certainty steady her. "I keep waiting for it to feel finished, for the fear to just go away." "It doesn't work like that. Healing's not a destination, it's a process. Some days will be harder than others." He was quiet for a moment. "I still have days where I miss Sarah so much I can barely breathe. Days where I feel guilty for being happy with you, like I'm betraying her memory. But those days are getting fewer. The good ones are starting to outnumber the hard ones." "When did that happen?" "Gradually. So gradually I didn't notice until I looked back and realized whole weeks had gone by where I felt more alive than broken." He squeezed her hand. "It'll happen for you too. Is happening already, if you pay attention." He was right. The nightmares were less frequent now. The hypervigilance was fading. She could sleep through the night most times, could let people approach without calculating exit strategies. The scar on her neck had faded from angry red to pale silver, and most days she forgot it was there. That weekend, they had a celebration. Emma's Cheese had won an award at a regional food competition, beating out operations 10 times their size. The whole family drove to Austin for the ceremony, and watching Emma accept her trophy, confident and articulate, and so much like the woman she was becoming, Lydia felt something shift in her chest. This was what rebuilding looked like. Not dramatic gestures or sudden healing, but quiet moments of pride and progress. Kids growing into themselves. A ranch finding its footing. People learning to trust again. After the ceremony, they went out for dinner at a restaurant nice enough that Jessie complained about having to wear real shoes. They sat in a booth built for 6, barely enough room, but they made it work. And for 2 hours, they were just a family celebrating something good. The waitress kept looking at them with a smile Lydia couldn't quite interpret until Emma explained it later. "She thought we looked happy, like genuinely happy. I guess that's rare enough to notice." Maybe it was. Maybe happiness was rarer than people admitted, especially the kind built on foundations of loss and struggle and choosing to keep going anyway. But they had it, however imperfect and hard-won. The challenges didn't stop. They never would. In May, a drought threatened the garden and they had to invest in irrigation they couldn't quite afford. In June, one of Jesse's coupes caught fire from a heat lamp malfunction, and they spent a week rebuilding. In July, Emma's best helper quit suddenly for a better-paying job, and they scrambled to fill the gap. But they handled it, all of it, together. Lydia's role in the family had evolved into something she couldn't quite define. She wasn't the kids' mother. They'd made it clear they didn't need a replacement for Sarah. But she wasn't just Caleb's girlfriend either. She was something in between, something new. Emma called her Lydia and asked her advice about boys and business in the same breath. Jesse showed her his homework before showing Caleb. Maddie sought her out when the world got too loud, sitting in companionable silence while Lydia worked in the shop. The town's opinion had shifted too. The same people who'd whispered about her when she first arrived now greeted her by name at the store. The waitress at the diner saved them their favorite booth. The sheriff stopped by occasionally, not on business but just to check in, to make sure they were all right. She'd become part of the fabric of the place. Not an outsider or a runaway or someone temporary. Just Lydia, who worked the Ridge Ranch and made cheese equipment and loved a widower with 3 kids. In August, Caleb asked her to marry him. Not dramatically or publicly, just the two of them on the porch after the kids had gone to bed, stars scattered across the sky like someone had been generous with diamonds. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "Wanted to ask first, make sure you were interested before I spent money we should probably use for feed." Lydia laughed at that, at the practical romance of it. "You're supposed to sweep me off my feet. I'm a rancher, not a poet. Best I can do is promise you a life that's hard and dirty and never boring. Promise you 3 kids who'll test your patience and a piece of land that'll break your back. Promise you I'll mess up regularly, but I'll always try to do better." He took her hands. "Promise you won't ever have to run again because you'll always have somewhere to stand." It wasn't flowery. It wasn't what romance novels promised, but it was real, and it was true, and it was exactly what Lydia needed to hear. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They told the kids the next morning over breakfast. Emma whooped loud enough to scare the chickens. Jesse asked if this meant Lydia was officially their stepmom. Maddie just smiled and went back to her oatmeal. But later that day, Lydia found a drawing on her workbench. Stick figures of 5 people and a house and a son, labeled "My Family" in Maddie's careful handwriting. Lydia kept that drawing, put it in a frame, and hung it in the workshop where she could see it every day. A reminder that family wasn't just blood or legal documents. It was the people who showed up, who stayed, who chose each other over and over. They planned a small wedding for October, after harvest season when they might actually have time to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just family and friends, probably in the backyard, definitely with food they grew themselves. Emma was already planning the menu. Jesse wanted to be in charge of music. Maddie asked if she could grow the flowers. Planning it felt surreal. Lydia had never imagined getting married, had actively avoided the idea after Marcus. Marriage meant being trapped, controlled, owned. But this didn't feel like any of that. This felt like partnership, like building something together that was stronger than what either of them could build alone. September brought the kind of heat that made everything shimmer, that turned the ranch into something wavering and uncertain at the edges. They worked early mornings and late evenings, avoiding the brutal middle of the day. The garden struggled despite irrigation. The chickens laid less in protest of the temperature. Even the cheese operation slowed as they waited for cooler weather. But they endured it the way they'd endured everything else. Together, with humor when possible and grim determination when humor failed. It was during one of those brutal September afternoons that the final piece of the past caught up with Lydia. She was in the workshop trying to stay cool while finishing a bookshelf for Emma's room when a car pulled up that she didn't recognize. Her first instinct was fear. Marcus had found a way, had broken parole, was here. But the woman who got out was a stranger. Mid-50s, professional-looking, with kind eyes and a tentative smile. "I'm looking for Lydia Cross," the woman said. "That's me." "My name is Margaret Harris. I'm a victim advocate in Oklahoma City. I work with domestic violence survivors." She pulled out identification, showing it to Lydia. "I was hoping we could talk." They sat on the porch with iced tea, and Margaret explained why she'd come. Marcus had been required to attend counseling as part of his parole. During one of those sessions, he'd mentioned Lydia by name, and the counselor had flagged it for Margaret's office. "We wanted to make sure you knew he was talking about you. that you were aware and safe. Margaret pulled out a folder. He's been compliant with parole terms so far, hasn't violated the restraining order, hasn't left Oklahoma, is attending all required sessions. But in those sessions, he talks about you constantly, about getting closure, about wanting to apologize properly, about how his treatment didn't address the real issues. Lydia's stomach twisted. Is that a threat? Not overtly, but his counselor is concerned about his fixation, about whether he's actually processing his behavior or just waiting out his parole. Margaret set the folder on the table between them. I'm here to offer you resources, support groups, counseling, legal aid if you need to strengthen the restraining order, and to give you this. She pulled out an envelope. Inside was a letter, not from Marcus, but from 3 other women. Women he'd dated after Lydia. Women who'd experienced the same pattern of control and escalation and violence. They wanted you to know you weren't alone, Margaret said quietly, that what happened to you wasn't unique or your fault, that he's done this before and will probably do it again. Lydia read the letters with shaking hands. The details were different, but the pattern was identical. The charm at the beginning, the slow isolation, the way he made them doubt their own reality, the explosion when they tried to leave. One woman had ended up in the hospital. Another had fled to a different state. The third was still fighting him in court over custody of their daughter. Why are you showing me this? Lydia asked. Because his parole ends in 4 years. When it does, the restrictions end too. The restraining order becomes harder to enforce if he moves states. The monitoring stops. Margaret leaned forward. These women want to build a case. Multiple victims, clear pattern of behavior, evidence of ongoing risk. If we can show he's a serial abuser, we can pursue a longer-term solution. Civil commitment, extended supervision, something that keeps him monitored even after parole ends. What do you need from me? Your testimony, your records, your willingness to stand with these other women and show the pattern. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. I know it's asking a lot. I know you've built a life here and probably want to forget he exists. But this could protect not just you, but every woman he might target in the future. Lydia looked out at the ranch, at the land she'd helped save, at the workshop that was hers, at the house where 3 kids and a good man waited for her. She'd fought so hard to build this life, to move beyond being Marcus's victim. The idea of dragging it all back up, of reliving it in courtrooms and depositions, made her want to refuse. But she thought about those 3 women, about the woman Marcus was probably already identifying as his next target, about the pattern continuing because nobody stopped it. I'll do it, she said, whatever you need. Margaret smiled. Thank you. I'll be in touch with next steps. After she left, Lydia sat alone on the porch for a long time. Eventually, Caleb came looking for her, took one look at her face, and sat down without asking questions. I have to go back, she said finally. Not physically, but mentally. I have to relive everything to help stop him from doing it to someone else. Okay? It's going to be hard. It's going to bring up things I've tried to bury. I know. And I'm asking you to be patient with me while I do it, to understand if I'm difficult or distant or scared. Caleb pulled her close. Lydia, you stood with me when I was losing everything. You stood with my kids when we were falling apart. You stood against people trying to destroy us. You think I can't stand with you through this? She leaned into him, drawing strength from his steadiness. I don't want Marcus to have any more of my life. I've given him enough. Then don't think of it as giving him anything. Think of it as taking power away from him, as protecting people he hasn't hurt yet. Caleb kissed her forehead. You're not doing this alone. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here. The work of building the case took months. Depositions and interviews, coordinating with the other women, compiling evidence that spanned years and states. It was exhausting and triggering, and there were days Lydia wanted to quit. But she didn't. Because somewhere in the process of telling her story alongside these other women, something shifted. She stopped seeing herself as Marcus's victim and started seeing herself as a survivor who'd escaped and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The other women were the same, strong, resilient, refusing to be defined by what had been done to them. They became friends, these women connected by trauma and determination. They video called weekly, supporting each other through the hard parts, celebrating small victories. When one of them had a breakdown, the others rallied. When one of them wanted to quit, the others reminded her why it mattered. The wedding happened in October as planned. Small and perfect, exactly what they'd wanted. Jim Brewster officiated. He'd gotten ordained online specifically for this. Emma made all the food, a feast of cheese and vegetables, and chicken from their own ranch. Jesse's music playlist was chaotic but enthusiastic. Maddie's flowers were simple and beautiful, arranged in jars scattered across tables made from sawhorses and plywood. Lydia wore a simple dress she'd bought at a consignment shop, her hair down, the scar on her neck visible. She'd stopped hiding it months ago, stopped seeing it as evidence of weakness. It was just part of her story now, the proof that she'd survived something terrible and kept going. Caleb wore boots and his best jeans, scrubbed clean but still looking like a rancher. When he saw her walking toward him through the garden, his eyes got shiny and his voice cracked on his vows. "I promise to stand with you," he said, "in the good times and the hard ones, when the ranch is thriving and when it's failing, when you're strong and when you're struggling. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your safe place. I promise that you'll never have to face anything alone again." Lydia's own vows were simpler. "I promise to stay, no matter what comes, no matter how hard it gets. I promise to choose this, choose you, choose us, every single day." They kissed to cheering and applause, and then they fed people and danced badly and watched the sun set over land that was theirs, all of theirs. Family and friends and found community, celebrating not just a wedding, but survival and rebuilding and the stubborn refusal to let trauma win. Later, after everyone had left and the kids were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Lydia and Caleb sat on their porch and looked at the stars. "You know what I realized today?" Lydia said. "What's that?" "I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding or surviving or waiting for the next bad thing. I'm just living, building, being part of something." "Took you long enough to figure that out." She smiled. "Yeah, guess I'm slow." "You're not slow. You're thorough. You don't do anything halfway." He pulled her closer. "That's one of the things I love about you." They sat in comfortable silence, and Lydia thought about the woman who'd stepped off that bus 8 months ago, lost and scared and convinced she'd never belong anywhere. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she used to be in another life. This life, the one with the ranch and the kids and the man beside her and the work that mattered, this was real. This was earned. This was hers. The case against Marcus progressed through winter. The prosecutor was optimistic about civil commitment once parole ended, about keeping him under supervision for years beyond his sentence. It wasn't perfect, wasn't guaranteed, but it was something. It was accountability and consequences, and the legal system actually working the way it was supposed to. Spring came again, the ranch's second spring since Lydia had arrived. Emma graduated high school early, got accepted to a state university with a program in food science and business. She planned to commute, to keep running the cheese operation while studying. Jesse was talking about getting into breeding, about creating specialty chicken varieties. Maddie wanted to expand the garden into a U-pick operation, let people come harvest their own vegetables. The ranch was growing, thriving, becoming something none of them had imagined a year ago. And Lydia was growing too. She'd started speaking at domestic violence awareness events, sharing her story, encouraging other women to seek help and press charges, and refuse to disappear. It was hard every time, ripping open old wounds in front of strangers. But it was worth it when someone approached her afterward with tears in their eyes and said, "Thank you for making me feel less alone." In May, the prosecutor called with news. Marcus had violated parole, a technical violation, being in the same town as one of his victims, and was back in prison. The civil commitment hearing was postponed, but this bought them time. More time to build the case, more time to keep him locked up, more time for everyone to stay safe. "How long?" Lydia asked. "Another 18 months minimum. Could be longer depending on the parole board." The prosecutor paused. "He's making it easy for us, Lydia. Every violation, every obsessive letter, every rule he breaks, it all builds our case that he's dangerous and shouldn't be released." After hanging up, Lydia sat with the news for a long time. 18 more months, maybe longer. Maybe eventually he'd mess up enough that the system would keep him locked away permanently. But she realized something sitting there. It didn't matter as much as it used to. Whether Marcus was in prison or out, supervised or free, he couldn't touch the life she'd built, couldn't destroy what she'd created. She'd moved beyond him, beyond the fear, beyond letting him define her existence. That night at dinner, surrounded by her family, because that's what they were now, legally and emotionally and in every way that mattered, she looked around the table and felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Gratitude. Not for the trauma or the running or the fear, but for where those things had led her, for the strength she'd discovered in survival, for the family she'd found in strangers, for the home she'd built in a place she'd only meant to hide. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, noticing her expression. "I'm thinking that I'm glad I got on that bus. Glad I ended up here. Glad I stayed." She looked at each of them. Emma arguing with Jesse about music, Maddie quietly eating, Caleb watching her with love in his eyes. "Glad I found you." Emma stopped mid-argument. "That's weirdly sentimental for you." "Yeah, well, I'm feeling sentimental." "It's allowed," Jesse said generously. "You're family. Family gets to be weird sometimes." And that was it, really. The whole thing distilled down to something simple and true. She was family. She belonged. She'd run for 3 years looking for safety and found something better. She'd found home. The ranch would keep having problems. Money would stay tight. Equipment would break. Weather would threaten crops. Emma would leave for college eventually. Jesse and Maddie would grow up and move away. And Lydia and Caleb would get older managing land that demanded everything they had. But they'd handle it, together, because that's what family did. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the dishes were done and the ranch was settling into darkness, Lydia stood in the doorway of the workshop looking at everything she'd built there. The cheese equipment Emma used, the shelves she'd made for Maddie's gardening supplies, the half-finished dining table that would seat 8 because they needed room for the family that kept growing. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You okay?" "Yeah. Just thinking." "About?" "About how scared I was when I got here. How certain I was that I'd ruin everything, or bring disaster, or that Marcus would find me and destroy all of you." She leaned back against him. "About how wrong I was." "You didn't ruin anything. You saved it, saved us. We saved each other." "Fair enough." He kissed her neck right over the scar. "Come to bed. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Tomorrow would be a long day. And the day after that. And every day for the rest of their lives, probably. But they'd face those days together, building something that would outlast them. Creating a legacy not of perfection, but of resilience. Not of easy victories, but of refusing to quit. Lydia Cross had spent 3 years running from a man who wanted to own her, had landed in a dying ranch with a broken family and then decided to stay. Had fought battles she didn't ask for, and won some and lost others. Had learned that healing wasn't linear, and love wasn't easy, and home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built with your own scarred hands and stubborn heart. She wasn't the woman Marcus had tried to destroy. She wasn't the woman who'd stepped off that bus desperate and alone. She was someone new, someone forged in struggle and strengthened by community and defined by her own choices rather than someone else's violence. She was Lydia Cross of Ridge Ranch, wife to Caleb, stepmother to 3 kids who'd taught her what family really meant, builder of cheese equipment and chicken coops and futures, survivor who'd become a thriver, and she was finally, blessedly, home. The stars came out over Texas the way they always did, scattered and brilliant against the dark. Inside the house, the kids slept soundly. In the barn, animals settled for the night. In the garden, plants grew in darkness, roots reaching deep. And on the porch, where so many hard conversations and quiet moments had happened, Lydia and Caleb sat together watching their land, their life, their hard-won peace. "You know what I think?" Caleb said after a while. "What's that?" "I think we're going to be okay. All of us. Not perfect, not easy, but okay." Lydia took his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own. "Yeah, I think you're right." And she finally believed it. The running was over. The fear was fading. The future was uncertain but filled with possibility. She'd found what she'd been looking for without knowing she was looking: a place to stand, people to stand with, and the courage to keep standing no matter what came next. The ranch would endure. The family would grow. And Lydia Cross would wake up every morning in the same place, next to the same person, living the same beautiful, difficult, imperfect life she'd chosen. Not because it was easy, but because it was hers. And that made all the difference.